161. The wise do not buy rumors. Since they already knew how to deal with Cerberus and had confirmed that the item hidden in the corridor on the right side of the fourth floor had been brought back to school by Hagrid, the trip to the cabin hadn't been wasted. After a while, when Hagrid's guard against the three of them relaxed, they could try to trick him again to learn the item's value, and then the matter would be essentially settled. Of course, there was another option. The three of them could go straight to that fourth-floor corridor and see for themselves what was hidden. But that would inevitably draw Dumbledore's attention, and since they were only curious and had no intention of claiming the item, there was no need to risk it. The next few days at school were peaceful. Nothing much happened beyond Professor Flitwick stamping his little feet and banging on his desk again. Hermione Granger's brilliance on display had reminded Flitwick of Ada 2 years earlier, equally clever and yet sorted into Gryffindor. Flitwick began to suspect once more that the sorting hat might be rigged. Losing Ada, then Hermione, no dean would have been pleased. Snape was an exception. Ada and Hermione were both Muggle-born, and Slytherin rarely had students of that background, let alone 2 in 3 years. The idle trio that surrounded Ada turned their attention to the Marauders map, trying to track Quirrell's every movement. There was nothing unusual to report. Quirrell could always be found in a classroom, his office, or among the crowded names in the Great Hall. His ordinary routine seemed to contradict Ada's suspicions, but it was precisely his normalcy that made it seem contrived. Those watching him felt certain he was hiding something. Ada wasn't sure how Dumbledore observed Quirrell, but she believed nothing of Quirrell's movements could escape Dumbledore's notice. Dumbledore was surely waiting for the moment Quirrell would reveal himself. Unusual or not, life went on. For Ada, the days felt a bit rougher than usual. Word had gotten out that she was the first-string chaser for Gryffindor, which meant Wood's tactic of muddying the water had worked. Attention had shifted away from the real Quaffle, Harry, and landed on Ada. That was good for the team, but not for Ada personally. A lot of people wanted to see her fail. Envy is a natural thing. Ada was top of her year, exceptionally talented and beautiful, so she attracted a lot of grudging attention. Now rumors that she would be playing Quidditch lifted that envy to a new pitch. People were waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Thankfully, most of the snide remarks were made behind her back. If said to her face, she would probably have retorted, "Envious? That's what you get when you've had no parents since childhood and lived in an orphanage for 12 years. Gossip is unpleasant, but if you don't take it to heart, it's not dangerous." Ada heard the whispers but didn't care. They were harmless noise. That morning, she sat in the Great Hall eating as usual, and the owl army arrived on schedule. A gray owl accurately dropped a copy of the Quibbler at her place. Ada treated that rag as a joke book. Its absurd articles always made her laugh. It would have been an ordinary morning if not for 6 long-eared owls delivering long, slender packages. The packages looked exactly like broomsticks, and they were addressed to Harry. The twins went over to Harry's table to watch. Ada did not. She sipped her oatmeal and opened the Quibbler. She didn't need to see a new broomstick to be reminded she couldn't afford one. It would only make her jealous. Harry didn't even open his package at the table. He took it and ran, Ron close behind with his eyes glued to the parcel. "Harry's got a broomstick now," Fred reported to Ada when he returned. "The latest Nimbus 2000, George added. Ada snapped the Quibbler shut. "Isn't that what Oliver recommended?" she said. "Harry's not short of money. A Nimbus 2000 is nothing to him. You two should have guessed that already." "We think there's something you should know." George hesitated. "What is it?" "Don't do the coy thing," Ada said, smiling. "Are you afraid I'll be jealous of Harry? When have I ever been jealous? It's always others who are jealous of me." She looked around the Great Hall. Plenty of people were watching, waiting for her to stumble. Fred cut to the chase. Harry's broomstick wasn't bought by him. It was given to him. Couldn't have been Dumbledore or Professor McGonagall, could it? Ada teased, still not paying much attention. "Professor McGonagall," George said. "Ada, maybe this broom was actually meant for you." "That's nice," Ada replied, trying for casual. "Professor McGonagall really wants the team to win. You two should work hard this season. I'm full, going to class." Fred and George knew Ada too well. Her slight tremor, the way she walked out of the hall, they read them like an open book. She left the quibbler on the table. She wasn't in the mood to read jokes. Harry, following McGonagall's instructions, also left the hall with his package. The news spread fast. They met Malfoy at the door. First-year students weren't supposed to own broomsticks, so Harry, having one without punishment, suggested a special reason. That reason was obvious. Harry's now a member of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Only then could a first-year plausibly own a broomstick. Since Harry had joined the team, the question of who he'd replaced was clear. The comparison made it plain who was up and who was down. Those waiting to see Ada fail hadn't expected a punchline so soon, only a week into term. They thought they'd have to wait until the season began. It was unbelievably quick. Ada might be the player with the shortest tenure as a starter. She hadn't yet played a match. Back at school, idle minds raced, and news of the struggle between Ada and Harry spread faster than the Nimbus 2000. By afternoon, everyone knew. And of course, people with motives watched everything Ada did and overinterpreted it. Her actions were treated the same as Fooley and Quirrell's. Every word and movement became fuel for gossip, evidence that she'd lost her place. Not eating much that morning became proof she was fishing for sympathy. Borrowing a quill in class became evidence of poverty, the supposed reason she'd lost to Harry. Not answering questions in Transfiguration was turned into proof she thought Professor McGonagall was biased and that her loss was due to favoritism. In short, the story they told themselves was this: Ada had been brought down, and what could be more satisfying than seeing someone who looked down on others finally humbled? There are always people who take pleasure in other people's mistakes. Watching someone else stumble is their favorite entertainment. Today they finally had cause to celebrate. Ada had made a public blunder, and they were already planning a merciless comeback. If Harry performed brilliantly in the official game, it would be a humiliating slap in Ada's face. The better he did, the worse it would hurt. What they didn't realize was that they would never get the satisfaction they hoped for. Ada didn't care about Harry being named the Quaffle. As long as it wasn't her, anyone could have the role. She didn't base her misery on whether Harry or anyone played well. That wasn't the sore spot. What gnawed at her was that the broom he'd been given had come from Professor McGonagall. If Dumbledore had presented Harry with a broom, Ada might have shrugged. If McGonagall had bought him a rocket, she would have been indifferent. But it was McGonagall herself who had handed Harry a Nimbus 2000. That small fact set her teeth on edge. Jealousy is childish and ugly. Ada knew it didn't suit her, but knowing it and feeling it were two different things. She felt suddenly like one of the Weasleys, the overlooked Ron among 7 children, neither the eldest to get doted on nor the youngest to be spoiled, not the standout like Charlie or Percy. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley loved their children, but they weren't even-handed gods. They were human and inevitably favored some more than others. Ada felt like Ron, Professor McGonagall's Ron, while Harry was whoever got the most attention. Bill, Charlie, or Ginny. That thought flared hot and bitter in her chest. She hated herself for feeling that way. She looked at McGonagall differently now, as if she'd been demoted in the woman's affections. Ada wanted, in the most trite and theatrical way, to be comforted. During Transfiguration, she wore a face of woundedness. "Come coax me, I'm so easy to soothe," and hoped McGonagall would notice. But McGonagall, who had been married only briefly and had no children, didn't read those signs. If Mrs. Weasley had seen her, she would have known immediately. Parenting was a craft at which the Weasleys excelled, and Mrs. Weasley would never have missed this. McGonagall was brilliant at Transfiguration, but when it came to the messy business of adolescent jealousy, she was out of her depth. Ada's usual sensible manner kept McGonagall from suspecting the simmering green monster inside her. What made it worse was timing. People have those days, unspecified, recurring days, when everything feels raw. Irritability, anxiety, sensitivity all climb. If the broom had arrived a few days earlier or later, Ada could have handled it. But it came right then, as if to needle her on purpose. For 2 days she'd been trying to steady herself, to keep it from showing. The broom this morning simply shattered her fragile calm. Only the twins knew she was sulking. They tried to cheer her. The Nimbus was meant for you originally, it just got rerouted. But Ada heard only patronizing platitudes. That wasn't comfort, that was talking to a 3-year-old. She had been provisionally named Quaffle in the first week of school, and a fortnight later, still had no broom. What kind of owl delivered so slowly that it couldn't bring back a broken broom in half a month? Errol? The question made her want to laugh and cry at once. By the afternoon, it was potion class. Snape was indifferent to Ada now. As long as she didn't blow up the classroom, he would ignore her. He was still displeased with her, and the cold shoulder was his punishment. Normally, that would have been the end of it, but Ada was not herself. Distracted, she added too much leech juice to her cauldron. The mistake ruined an entire batch. Her shrinking solution had gone so wrong it might have been dangerous for everyone. She didn't want to be in the dungeon any longer. She needed to step away to collect herself. Raising her hand, she said, "Professor Snape, I'm not feeling well. May I leave early?" Snape didn't bother to look at her. "No, there are potions in the cabinet. Find one and drink it. If you poison yourself, that'll be your concern." He assumed she was angling for attention and was having none of it. So Ada stood up and walked not to the cabinet, but to the door. "If you go back to your seat now, Gryffindor won't lose any points," Snape warned. The threat of house point loss had once been enough to cow her. He had used it before to keep her in line. Today, though, it did the opposite. It made her feel small, like no one would notice her absence anyway if the house slipped down the table. If the house came last every year, what would change? She would still graduate. Who, she wondered bitterly, cared about her? She turned back toward him with a smile that tasted acidic. 5 points? 10? If that's not enough, how about 50? Then she left the dungeons. The room fell silent. No one spoke. No one wanted to attract Snape's ire. It was a rare sight. The house had been waiting to see Ada push back at Snape for over 2 years, and now they'd finally had it. A few of the braver ones thought the point deduction was worth the spectacle. Snape began to say, "Gryffindor will," and stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He had purposely been ignoring Ada because she and Harry had been together. That familiar pairing made him uneasy, as if old events were echoing back around him. And the expression on Ada's face as she left, something in the way she carried herself, had lodged in him. For a moment, displaced by memory, he seemed to see the past, and in that flash he saw himself. 163. The one Harry can't get Ada left without a care, but the twins who remained in the classroom were miserable. The ruined potion in the cauldron smelled so foul it gave them headaches. Fred and George scrubbed at the mess Ada had left, thinking about how to slip out when Snape approached with a dark look. "To my knowledge, Miss Tryst is Mr. Weasley's friend, isn't she?" Snape asked, his voice full of disdain as if looking at the potion itself. "Yes, Professor. We and Ada are best friends," one of the twins answered. "It doesn't look like it to me," Snape said. "Your so-called friend wasn't well. Why didn't you ask for leave for her? Is that thing on your neck just for show?" Snape's harsh words made the twins feel unjustly accused. They had wanted to ask for leave for Ada, but she'd been stubborn and refused. "Tryst has already left the classroom, and you two didn't follow to look after her. Is that how friends behave?" Snape lowered his voice so that only the 3 of them could hear. He kept glancing at Ada's bag as if his eyes were telling them, "Aren't you going to pick up your and Ada's bags and leave? Do you need me to escort you?" At that moment, the twins finally understood. The pouch full of galleons must have been returned by Snape. Despite everything, he had looked after Ada. He was infuriatingly contradictory. Fred and George stopped stalling, snatched up their bags and Ada's, and bolted out of the classroom. As they left, they heard Snape call after them, "Because you left the classroom without permission, Gryffindor loses 3 points. Also, tell Tryst that her detention begins tomorrow evening at 7. First Ada, then the twins. 3 Gryffindor students had left the classroom in succession, and Snape docked only 3 points. Could they really have heard him right? 3 points, not 30? With the loss recorded, Snape's mood visibly improved. He turned to the rest of the class. "Do none of you have anything better to do? At the end of class, I will feed the potions you made to your pets and see what happens." Ada didn't go back to the common room or to Twilight Cottage. Instead, she headed to the 5th floor and used a secret passage to reach the huge room hidden underground. She needed to blow off steam. The trial dummy now had the strength of Professor McGonagall or Snape. Ada couldn't overpower it yet. Her practical sessions had been mostly defensive with some counters. Today, though, she wouldn't be on the defensive. She launched a full-on assault. Flames flared and lit the underground room until it felt like a bright, airy classroom rather than a dungeon. Ada's attack was reckless. Her mind was full of the flying broom. She couldn't think clearly. That headlong ferocity let her seize the advantage for a time. She pushed the trial dummy back, nearly knocked it down, and almost won. But there was still a gap in strength. The dummy wasn't human and couldn't be cowed by a storm of blows. After enduring the initial onslaught, it regained control and quickly defeated the unguarded Ada. She lay on the cold floor, gasping. The fury had done its work. She'd calmed down. Professor McGonagall had been kind to her. It was Ada's own appetite for more that had led to today's trouble. And her strength simply wasn't sufficient yet. If she could match or surpass Dumbledore, no one could unseat her in the future. But today was not the day for more exertion, so she stopped training. The flames died away, and the huge room sank back into darkness. Only Ada's steady breathing filled the silence. She conjured a thin blanket, wrapped herself up, and stayed in the underground room. She curled into herself, like a child in the womb, a gesture that felt somehow safe. Thinking back on her outburst made her laugh. She'd behaved like a sulking child over something small. She wondered what Fred and George were doing and pictured them laughing at her. She had even teased them about old Errol. In this world, only the twins would know she hadn't been mocking their poverty. She thought of Professor McGonagall and hoped she wouldn't be too upset by Gryffindor's lost points. She thought of Snape. He must be furious after she'd confronted him in front of so many students, and yet confronting him had felt satisfying. She thought of Angelina and Alicia. They were Quidditch players, not delicate maidens. There was no way they'd be scared by her. Curled against the wall in the dark, Ada fell asleep. The trial dummy, forgotten and not put away, stood nearby like a silent guard. After some time, she woke up hungry. She packed the dummy away and climbed the slope to the small landing at the secret passage entrance. From inside the passage, she could see out through the mirror at its mouth. Whenever she left, she checked the mirror. Today, it was an exception. Someone had stopped. The twins were sitting opposite the mirror and had evidently been there for a long time. Fred had slumped over and was asleep against George, and George's head was beginning to nod. Ada felt a flash of amusement and something else she didn't want to admit. She stepped out of the passage, and the sound of her footsteps roused the dozing George. Fred woke as well. "Why are you two here?" Ada asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Only the three of us in the whole school know about this passage. What do you think we're doing here?" Fred said irritably, rubbing his eyes and yawning. "Do you believe me if I say I'm waiting for my old dear Filch?" "We checked the Marauders map," George said more patiently. "Your name wasn't on the girls' dormitory, but you were down here, so we waited at the entrance." "Then why didn't you go down?" Ada pressed. "We thought you might want some quiet time, so we stayed out here," Fred replied, standing and thumping Ada's shoulder with a practiced gesture. "Besides, you don't listen to us, and it's pitch black down there. What's the point?" When she'd been in the underground room, Ada hadn't wanted quiet time. She'd only slept. Now she felt stiff and sore. She might as well have gone to Twilight Cottage to get some actual rest, but she didn't dare tell them that. The twins would have strangled her for wasting time. Seeing Ada's silence, George tried to reassure her. "Don't worry about brooms, and don't fuss over how McGonagall treats Harry. Just be yourself, and besides, you've got us." "That's right," Fred added with a grin. "We're the two men Harry will never get." Ada laughed at that for the first time since she'd learned the broom had come from Professor McGonagall. She hugged the twins and said happily, "I'm starving. Let's go get something to eat." "Ada, you might be celebrating too soon," the twins said together as they held her. "Dinner's long over." Jealousy was a normal human reaction, another way of showing you cared, and an unconscious defense against the fear of losing something. Ada was grateful for Professor McGonagall's attention and had gradually grown used to it. So when someone else received the same attention, she panicked. If she had never been McGonagall's favorite, or if she didn't care what the professor thought, 100 more Harry Potters could have appeared, and Ada wouldn't have acted so childishly. It was precisely because she'd once had that favor and valued it that she felt jealous and hurt. It was human nature, not a flaw in her character. If she hadn't cared at all, McGonagall would have been right to feel that it had been wasted, and Ada would have proved herself ungrateful, like a wolf refusing kindness. The girlish side Ada displayed, petulance, pettiness, temper, didn't ruin her friendships with the Weasley twins. If anything, Fred and George found it entertaining. It made Ada seem more real. She had things she wasn't good at, a vulnerable, sensitive streak. She could lose her temper, get jealous, and act small. That made her more normal and, to many, somehow cuter than the schemer who only ever planned ahead. Her little scene with Snape and the skipped potions class made her famous all over Hogwarts. Anyone who defied Snape in the way she did would be talked about, and the fact that Ada's punishment was only 3 points and detention only added to the legend. Suddenly, dozens of students who wanted a bit of notoriety had a new blueprint. If Ada could pull it off, why not them? Snape, though, was still Snape. He cracked down mercilessly on anyone else who tried to challenge him. Points were docked from several houses. Filch acquired a small army of helpers, and the reminder of Snape's terror spread like wildfire. As the cause of the commotion, Ada paid the price. Afterwards, potions became a daily ordeal. Snape's questions ceased to have any syllabus at all. Sometimes they were impossible even for top students, and his verbal assaults and point deductions continued. But everyone noticed that something had changed in Ada. Ever since that confrontation, she had grown bolder. She no longer cowered before Snape's tyranny. She would argue back on occasion and seemed unconcerned about losing points. If she wanted to speak, she spoke. The jealousy episode freed Ada in other ways too. She stopped moderating herself in the hopes of saving a few Gryffindor points. She didn't carefully shape her answers just to earn a sliver of favor. If her affection had truly gone, she could not force it back. McGonagall knew Ada's nature better than anyone, so there was no point pretending to be the model student. Let that role and that quaffle belong to Harry Potter. Ada unclenched. No more pretending. From then on, anyone who provoked her or acted arrogant in her presence would find her a dangerous opponent. Her changes weren't limited to the classroom. Ada retreated socially and reverted in some ways to the quieter first-year version of herself. Her circle of friends shrank dramatically. Many acquaintances dropped away. Compared with her first year, she only kept 2 additions, her roommate Katie Bell and Cedric Diggory from another house. She didn't have the charisma of a Dumbledore or a Grindelwald, no silver tongue to rally crowds. Her confidence lay in a rarer talent. If she became strong enough, she believed followers would come. After all, Lord Voldemort had gathered legions. Why couldn't she? She also adjusted her habits. Quidditch was out for the moment. Ada's agile figure and sharp commands were no longer seen on the practice pitch. Fred and George didn't drag her along anymore, not because she hated Quidditch, but because she didn't want to look at a certain broomstick, didn't want to watch someone else soaring on it. The twins understood, but Harry and Ron, emotionally tone-deaf at times, did not. They had no idea how they had offended her. Ada had been quietly distancing herself from Harry and Ron, and the pair couldn't comprehend it. All they could think about was Quidditch, and the twins kept assuring them it wasn't about that. October slid by. Ada didn't celebrate her birthday. There was nothing to celebrate. Still, a few friends left gifts, and Ada received an oversized box of fizzing Whizbees. There was no name on the box, but she knew who had sent it. Dumbledore had promised at St. Keeney Mungo's to send her fizzing Whizbees on her birthday, so she would know what the best sweet in the world tasted like. The candy was indeed delicious, even if Ada had heard the headmaster had recently found a new favorite and that someone had changed the password for the 8th floor corridor. Halloween approached, and Hogwarts transformed. Pumpkins were everywhere. Lanterns hung from rafters, roasted pumpkin scents drifted down the corridors from morning, and the breakfast table was all pumpkin. Pie, juice, even the porridge. After that meal, Ada decided she wouldn't touch pumpkin for a long time. She remembered the first Halloween, when money was tight and she, Fred, and George had hollowed out Hagrid's enormous pumpkin to make a crude jack-o'-lantern. It had been rough, but they'd had fun. This year, they could have bought elaborate ghost costumes, but none of them felt like sneaking around intersections to startle passersby. That evening, Ada and the twins went straight to the Great Hall for the Halloween feast. Fred and George chattered about the ghouls and imps that had frightened them on the way. They loved the melodrama of it, while Ada hoped the feast would offer anything but pumpkin. Luckily, it did. Many other delicacies were laid out, and she finally got a decent meal that didn't taste of squash. Midway through the feast, their chatter was cut off by a disheveled Quirrell bursting into the hall. The professor looked utterly terrified, his long scarf askew, eyes wide. He stumbled toward Dumbledore's table, trembling as though on the verge of fainting. "One galleon, it's bad," Fred murmured to Ada, certain from Quirrell's appearance that something serious had happened. "You don't need to be stupid to tell." Ada glanced at Fred and rolled her eyes. "Doesn't this feel familiar?" she said. "Exactly like Filch that time in the first year," George agreed. "Only Filch handled it better." They all remembered how Filch, panicked, had run into the hall to announce that Daniel Bell had been attacked. Daniel hadn't been seen since. No one knew how or if he would recover. Quirrell, still clutching the table, tried to speak. His voice came out breathless and trembling. "Troll! A troll in the dungeons! I thought you should know." Before he could say more, Quirrell crumpled and fainted onto the floor. The Great Hall erupted into alarm. 165. Snape versus the Three-Headed Dog. Quirinus Quirrell, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, was supposed to be a role model for the students, and yet he'd fainted from the sight of a troll, right in front of everyone. It was humiliating. The sight of the frail, trembling man only cemented his reputation as useless. Maybe Quirrell really was hopeless, or maybe he cultivated that image on purpose. When word spread that a troll had entered the school, the Great Hall dissolved into chaos. Students scrambled for the exits, desperate to get home if they could. Ida privately wished, not for the first time, that someone would step on Quirrell and send him to Merlin sooner rather than later. Of course, no one heard her wish, and Quirrell stayed untrampled. Dumbledore finally quieted the hall with a few purple fireworks from his wand. "Prefects," he said softly, "lead your houses back to the dormitories at once." The prefects moved efficiently. The head boy, head girl, and all the prefects marshaled their houses. Percy on Gryffindor's side looked as practiced and officious as ever. He might have been rehearsing that particular look in private. Ida remembered when she was a first year and Charlie had led Gryffindor back to the tower. Percy looked jaunty, but Charlie had seemed safer. As they followed the crowd toward the portrait-guarded staircases, Ida muttered, "How did a troll even get in? Those magical wards outside aren't for decoration." "Maybe Quirrell let it in," Fred said. "Although I'd rather Peeves had. He's more dramatic, at least." "It's a distraction," George added. "Students tucked away, professors dealing with the troll. If someone wanted to get at whatever's behind the thing Cerberus guards, this is the perfect opportunity." Ada agreed. "Exactly. A troll's not clever enough to find the right door on its own. Someone had to bring it in." They reached the split, where Gryffindor and Hufflepuff went different ways. Ida spotted Harry and Ron trying to elbow through the press of students. They were doing that hopeless Gryffindor thing of pushing forward instead of waiting. Ida ignored them. She had larger plans and wasn't about to report two fellow troublemakers. She shot a quick look at the twins and slipped out of line. Fred and George read the look perfectly. They ducked low, slipped away from the procession, and followed Ida toward the fourth floor. None of the three cared about the troll. They cared about the fourth floor and what might be hidden there. They hurried, nervous they'd be too late, not thinking about danger. Ida trusted her strength. The twins trusted hers. They'd known her long enough not to mind the risk. As they neared the portrait corridor on the right side of the fourth floor, a deafening roar rolled out. Fluffy, the three-headed dog, bawled in warning. Ida flicked her wand and opened the door. Inside, Fluffy was pawing and snarling at a man in black robes. He was struggling to move. One leg looked badly hurt. The three of them froze in the doorway. "Professor Snape," they blurted together, mouths open. They had expected to catch Quirrell, not to find Snape struggling with a monstrous guard dog. The sight of the disheveled, injured potions master left Ida and the twins baffled and more than a little annoyed. Dumbledore trusted Snape. He'd even told Ida to rely on him. Snape's presence here didn't feel malicious. If anything, he was likely here to watch Quirrell too. And if he'd wanted to get past Fluffy, he could have dealt with the dog easily enough. Ida, who could knock Fluffy out herself if need be, saw no reason Snape couldn't have done the same. Yet Snape wasn't trying to kill the dog. He was defending himself, not attacking. Snape saw them at the door, and his face darkened. It was hard to tell whether he was angry at Ida for slipping away from the line or mortified to be seen by students in such a state. "Get him away from the dog," Ida snapped, recovering first. She produced a guitar with a practiced wand flick and started to play. She hadn't touched one in ages, and it sounded more like a cat in a cupboard than anything refined, but the tune had the exact effect needed. What sounded horrible to human ears was like a lullaby to Fluffy. The enraged beast's heads began to lower. Its eyes drooped. One by one, the 6 eyes closed, and it dozed, no longer menacing Snape. The twins, one on each side, hauled the injured Snape to his feet and began to guide him toward the door. They wore expressions of exaggerated distaste that would have infuriated him if he'd seen them. Ida kept her wand in hand, always better to have a backup. "Professor, why are you here?" she asked. "Why you are here," Snape replied sharply, "is why I am." He sheathed his wand and inspected the wound on his leg. It looked nasty enough to make Fred and George frown. Bitten by Fluffy and seen by students, if any of them gossiped, Snape's reputation would be in shreds. "You were actually bitten by the dog?" Ada said, with the light sarcasm she reserved for Snape. "Someone can get bitten by a pet like that, then." "Shut up," Snape snapped. "Do you want a repeat of the 3 cauldrons?" "Quirrell isn't here," Fred guessed. "Was this some Halloween surprise?" Snape gathered himself and resumed his usual icy demeanor. "That's none of your concern. If you value house points, get back to your dormitories." "What's Fluffy guarding? Tell us, and we'll go back," Ida bargained. "No comment. Ask the headmaster." Snape's authority had taken a hit today. He didn't have the cover to insist on secrecy with students in the same way. Dumbledore would be the one to say anything if anything was to be said. Ida offered another angle. "Do you need us to help with that leg? The 3 of us aren't planning anything." Fred and George were both silently thanking the ceiling for Ida's obvious face value confession. Snape would never accept help from them, and certainly not from Ida. "No," Snape said. "You 3 will go back to your dormitories immediately, or Gryffindor will lose 3. Ida cut him off. "Harry Potter didn't return to the dormitory. He must have gone looking for the troll." "What has that got to do with me?" Snape snapped. "If I catch him, Harry Potter can expect expulsion." He straightened painfully and barked, "Now go, back to your dormitories, at once." Then to the twins' astonishment, he turned and left. He moved with 2 quick strides that made the limp in his leg vanish. Whatever the injury, he wasn't going to let it slow him when something urgent needed doing. Fred blinked at Ida. "Where did Harry come from? You haven't mentioned him in over a month." 166. Hermione, who surrounded Y and rescued Jiaowang. Since the flying broomstick incident, Ada had almost never mentioned Harry Potter, and Fred and George rarely broached the subject around her. Time might heal, the twins thought, but more than a month had passed before they heard Harry's name from her again. "Did I not mention him?" Ada asked, tilting her head. "That can't be." "The last time you said Harry's name was mid-September," George cut in. "You haven't mentioned him since." "We're 3rd years, and he's a 1st year," Ada protested. "Our classes and lives don't intersect. It's normal not to talk about him." She could admit to herself that she was being petty, but she wouldn't say so out loud. The twins didn't believe a word of it. Of all the students at Hogwarts, Ada had been the first to know Harry Potter. She hadn't made a scene about it like that first-year Draco Malfoy. She was just sulking a little, which was understandable. George added, "When you said Harry might be looking for a troll, Snape left straight away. Is there something between them?" Then he corrected himself. "No, that can't be." Since Harry arrived, Snape had found a new target. Harry became the most dreaded pupil in potions class. Even Neville Longbottom, who made mistakes constantly, and Ada, once an exemplary prefect, couldn't match the scrutiny Harry received. Snape and Harry were openly hostile to each other. In that light, why should Snape care if Harry was hunting a troll? Unless, could he really have been trying to get Harry expelled? I'm not sure, Ada said, but it feels wrong. Snape always goes after students, but Harry Potter isn't just any student. Ada thought Snape shouldn't have been so blatant even if he hated Harry. Something about it didn't sit right. She compared the situation to her own. Dumbledore had put extra work on Snape before, and Ada had deliberately used the troll story to test him. It was a small test, but it revealed something. A woman's intuition could be useful. Snape, having already found Harry, probably didn't expect to be exposed just because Ada suspected something. Ridiculous. If Snape had treated Ada as Dumbledore did, respecting her enough to listen, he might have taken her seriously. Instead, he dismissed her as a mere student. Not catching Quirrell, and only seeing Snape get bitten by Cerberus, had left the night feeling hollow. The three of them returned empty-handed to the common room, where the younger Gryffindors were still enjoying their Halloween feast, and Dumbledore's savior training continued step by step. November brought colder weather, and Ada wrapped up in thicker clothes. She hated Scotland's cold. She liked warm sunlight on her skin. Despite the drop in temperature, Hogwarts buzzed with excitement. The Quidditch season was beginning. As the most popular sport in the wizarding world, matches drew huge attention. Professor McGonagall even let her team members skip homework so they could practice. If McGonagall relaxed rules for Quidditch, everyone knew how important it was. Gryffindor also had Harry Potter this year. The team's savior making his debut made everyone eager to see how he would fly. Ada stood alone in the stands. Most of the people she knew were on the field, and she didn't recognize the students beside her. Ron and Hermione were not far off. She could have joined them, but she didn't want to intrude and feel like a third wheel. Shortly after 11, the match began, and of course Lee Jordan supplied his biased commentary. Whenever Gryffindor faced Slytherin, his calls were hopelessly partisan. Slytherin play was rough, especially against Gryffindor, so it was no wonder Angelina was thrilled at the possibility Ada might appear on the field. The Slytherins didn't hold back for anyone. Harry, making his debut, was nearly knocked off his broom by Flint. Madam Hooch called a foul, but the Gryffindor standstill erupted. Harry had almost caught the golden snitch. That near success reassured the Gryffindors and raised hopes for victory. Then, things went wrong. One moment, Harry was flying perfectly. The next, his broom pitched and bucked as though he'd forgotten how to fly. Ada recognized the look. This wasn't forgetting. It was a broom gone out of control. The Nimbus 2000 was one of the best brooms available and had been given to him by Professor McGonagall. Its quality wasn't in question. If it wasn't Harry or the broom, someone was tampering with it. Broomsticks had anti-jinx measures, and it was difficult to curse one mid-match, especially a moving broom. Most students couldn't manage something like that. Only a professor might. Ada snatched the binoculars from the student next to her and scanned the stands for Quirrell. The owner of the binoculars started to complain, but shut up when he saw who had taken them. After searching a few stands, Ada found Quirrell. He was staring at Harry's broom, muttering to himself, and for the first time she saw him without his usual stutter. Snape sat just below Quirrell, also watching intently and muttering. Their attitudes were the same, but their purposes were different. One sought to harm Harry, the other to protect him. If Snape hadn't been there, Harry would likely have fallen and been seriously hurt. "You said you didn't know defense against the dark arts, but I finally caught you," Ada whispered, gripping the binoculars. Quirrell's eagerness exposed him. Through the lenses, Ada also saw Hermione Granger appear in Quirrell's stand. As another know-it-all, Ada expected Hermione's attention to go to Quirrell, but then she watched something that left her speechless. Rather than confront Quirrell, Hermione seized a spell and set Snape's robes on fire. Snape had been having a rotten run, first bitten by Cerberus, and now his robes aflame. Ada didn't know whether to laugh or to feel sorry. Seeing Snape reduced to such a sorry state for the sake of the moment gave Ada the odd impression that he might as well be the defense against the dark arts professor. The whole scene, accepting blame, bearing indignities, was both comical and heartbreaking. Ada had always thought Hermione was clever, but she hadn't expected her to be so unpredictable when it came to action. If the commotion in the stands hadn't disrupted Quirrell's spell, they might have been planning Harry's funeral by now. Hermione's intervention, however chaotic, actually saved the match. It was the indirect strategy in action: besiege Wei to rescue Zhao, create a diversion to free the real target. Everyone, including Ada, was operating on one level. Hermione had chosen a higher, more atmospheric level. By drawing attention to Snape, she both rescued Harry and avoided directly confronting the culprit. Ada could only hope that explanation might comfort Snape's wounded pride. Hermione's solution was messy and startling, but in the end, it worked. 167. Stay away from Potter chaos in the stands made it impossible for Quirrell to cast any more spells at Harry Potter. Harry, back on his broom, caught the golden snitch, or rather, he didn't so much catch it as snap it up between his teeth. Gryffindor won the opening match without much trouble, but the game was full of strange incidents. A Ravenclaw had tried every means to kill a Gryffindor, while a Slytherin had shielded the injured Gryffindor. It was a match nobody would forget. Ada was now absolutely certain that Quirrell had broken into Gringotts, that he was the one after the treasure hidden beneath Hogwarts, and that he had tried to kill Harry Potter along the way. The scandal was getting bigger and louder. After the game, she congratulated her friends on the good start, but she didn't go back to the common room to celebrate. She wanted to check on the solitary wounded professor. Harry, Ron, and Hermione hadn't gone straight to Gryffindor Tower either. They had followed Hagrid to his hut first. Ida, meanwhile, found herself at the door to Snape's office. She knocked, then heard Snape's impatient voice before she was even acknowledged. She pushed the door open and strode in. Snape had already changed his burned robe, though the new one was still black. "What are you doing here? There's no detention today," he snapped. "Of course I came to see if you were hurt, Professor," Ida said, casually picking up a potion bottle from the shelf, popping the cork and taking a quick sniff. "Enhancement potion?" "Yes." Snape's voice was clipped. He watched her with the faintest flicker of surprise. Once she would have been timid around him, never touching his things. Now she held his potion up like it was nothing and even joked with him. "How does it feel to be the scapegoat?" she added lightly. Snape's sallow face darkened. He had done what he thought right without expecting thanks, but being pilloried for it still stung. "If you're here to laugh at me, you'll be disappointed," he said. "It's best if you don't show your face around here for a while. I don't want to see Gryffindor." Ida carried a stool over and sat down, sudden seriousness replacing her earlier levity. "Professor, I don't understand why Quirrell would dare to hurt Harry Potter in front of so many people." When she'd caught Quirrell red-handed, Ida had been elated. After cooling down, she'd started asking the hard questions. In front of so many witnesses, Quirrell's actions made no sense. Even if Harry had fallen from his broom, there were so many professors present that killing him outright would be impossible. "You should ask him that question," Snape said. "I haven't figured it out either. Maybe he's like the troll on Halloween, not quite right in the head." If Ida had been in Quirrell's position, she thought, she would have been discreet, staying out of the spotlight until she got what she wanted. Quirrell, however, had done the opposite. He'd made himself look useless, then staged public violence as if announcing his villainy. It was the kind of careless, high-profile behavior that made investigators take notice. Ida couldn't make sense of it. Was he simply reckless or mad? How had he even gotten into Ravenclaw? His conduct was an insult to Rowena Ravenclaw. How would they ever recruit again? "Professor," she pressed, "what exactly is under the trapdoor that Quirrell wants so badly that he'd risk harming Harry Potter for it?" Snape's expression tightened. "One day your curiosity will kill you," he said, not cruelly but with genuine concern. In first year, hadn't Ida's curiosity already led Benedict Fooley to target her? Snape's warning was blunt. Curiosity was dangerous when your abilities didn't match it. "Then before I die, can't you at least satisfy my curiosity a little?" Ada asked. She knew the risks, but she couldn't help herself. Snape's mouth twisted. Yes, I can. In fact, I'll probably clap my hands with glee when it happens. You don't have to tell me when you die. I won't be attending your funeral. Ida stood there, momentarily speechless. Any thought she'd had of consoling him had been utterly ridiculous. She was about to leave when Snape spoke again, sharper this time. Stay away from Potter, and trouble will stay away from you. Don't involve yourself in everything. It won't do you any good. Half-truths were the worst, and Snape had just given her one. He warned her away from Harry without saying why, which only made her more puzzled. She'd guessed some of what was happening, but she didn't know the full sweep of Dumbledore's plan, if Dumbledore's plan even included her. Before she could force another question out of him, Snape brusquely shoved her out and slammed the door so hard the bang echoed down the corridor. Ida stood for a moment, debating whether to recreate some dramatic knocks and entreaties scene, but given Snape's temper, she knew he wouldn't open the door even if she broke her hand. Unless she tore the door off its hinges, she probably wouldn't be seeing him again today. Outside, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were leaving Hagrid's hut. Their conversation with Hagrid had been awkward. They were sure Snape was the mastermind, while Hagrid refused to believe a professor would hurt a student. Hagrid, oddly, slipped and let the name Nicholas Flamel fall into the conversation. That single word was a crucial clue. Ada had asked Hagrid, Snape, and even McGonagall questions and had been refused answers. Harry's casual question had been enough to get Hagrid to reveal something vital. It was maddening. On the walk back to the castle, the trio argued about who Nicholas Flamel might be. Not one of them, not Harry, not Ron, not even Hermione, the self-appointed know-it-all, had any idea. They decided to go to the library and look him up. Should we tell Ada? Ron asked suddenly. Oh, right. Ida's brilliant. She'll probably know who Nicholas Flamel is, Harry said, excited. They'd all noticed that Ida had been keeping her distance lately. If they hadn't seen it by now, their eyesight was failing. She is brilliant, but do we really want to involve someone else? Hermione asked. She didn't want to drag more people into danger for no reason. She needs warning about Snape, Ron blurted, glancing at his two friends. Ida's always getting detention from Snape. We should tell her to be careful. Ida wasn't wrong to pay attention to Ron. At least the boy knew to worry about her. Their youthful worries might have been clumsy, but the concern was sincere. Still, compared to the question of whether Snape was the mastermind, Ida was more curious about the name that had slipped out, Nicholas Flamel. After they returned to the castle, Ron had let Ada know about their suspicions regarding Snape, not directly, but through his older brothers. The next day the twins passed the message on, both trying hard to keep straight faces. They'd had a good laugh about it the day before, and were curious to see how the others would react once they figured it out on their own. Ada decided she should thank them. It was a useless kindness, perhaps, but the intention mattered. As for Snape's warning, she didn't take it too seriously. She was already in Dumbledore's sight. If Dumbledore wanted her for some plan, there was no escaping it with her current abilities. Still, she refused to be anyone's pawn. Ada wasn't about to sacrifice herself because someone else thought they could move her pieces on a board. She first went to Hermione's dormitory, but Hermione wasn't there. The twins couldn't find Ron or Harry either. After wandering the common room a few times with no luck, Ada gave up and went to the library to get on with her own reading. She'd say thanks if she ran into them later. At the library, she returned her books to Madame Pince. The librarian was as thin and hawkish as ever, fussing over the volumes as if any imperfection were a personal insult. Ada had always thought Madame Pince and Filch were a perfect match, both hated students and rule-breaking with a passion. Ada threaded through the stacks looking for more books. She didn't find the ones she'd come for, but she did hear the people she'd been trying to find. Hushed but unmistakable voices drifted through the shelves. Ron, Harry, and Hermione, arguing about a name, Nicholas Flamel. Who even is Nicholas Flamel? Ron was complaining. We've looked all morning and can't find him, not even a similar name. There was a thud as a book hit the table. We've only checked a few books. There are thousands in here. If we keep looking, we'll find him, Hermione said. She sounded like someone used to getting results by method and diligence. I've definitely seen the name before, Harry said. I just can't remember where. They were digging through a pile of books for anything that might point to Flamel, unaware that they were overheard, and unaware that they didn't need to search so frantically. Ada, who had lived at the library for 2 years and was the bane of Madame Pince's existence, knew exactly who Flamel was. If the trio had told her about Snape sooner, they would already know what they were looking for. Nicholas Flamel, Ada knew, was a 14th century French alchemist famed in both the wizarding and Muggle worlds. He was held up in Muggle legend as the father of European alchemy. Paris even had streets named after him, or so tales said. Most importantly, he was the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, the stone that could turn any metal into pure gold and produce the elixir of life, granting long life to whoever drank it. If a noise-filtering charm hadn't been on the corner of her mind, by now half the library might be accusing Snape of trying to steal the stone. She walked over and tapped the edge of a bookshelf so they would notice someone else was nearby. Ron looked up from the mess of books. Ada, what are you doing here? Did Fred and George tell you? They did. Thank you for your concern. Ada had to smile. The boys were clueless about her meaning. That's good. That's good. We were just a bit worried about you, Harry said. You've got to watch out for Snape. He's not a good person. They were still talking far too loudly for anyone who wanted secrecy. Ada folded her arms. If you're plotting something secret, could you please speak softer? Walls have ears. These shelves might as well be holes in the wall for sound. The three looked sheepish. They hadn't realized how loud they'd been. You heard all that? Hermione asked as she lowered her voice, suddenly alert. Ada nodded. Do you know who he is? Hermione pressed, testing whether Ada had actually overheard everything. Yes, Ada said. Nicholas Flamel, the alchemist, the only known creator of the Philosopher's Stone. It turns metal into pure gold and makes the elixir of life. And he was born in France in the 14th century, she added, glancing at the books piled on their table. So looking in studies in modern wizardry and modern history of magic is a waste of time. Harry murmured the name to himself, as if saying it would make more sense. Then, suddenly loud again, he said, Snape must be trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone. We have to stop him. Ada rolled her eyes. She had every reason to defend Snape. He had been good to her. Professor Snape isn't the one going to steal the stone, she said. Someone else is after it. But during the Quidditch match, Snape tried to kill Harry, Hermione snapped, cutting Ada off. From a very young age, Hermione Granger had been the model of a top student, the kind of child her Muggle parents bragged about, the one they were certain would do great things. So when the acceptance letter to Hogwarts arrived, the change in her life was seismic. Hermione was anxious about going to a place she knew nothing about and terrified of slipping from the top of the class to the bottom. During the summer, she devoured every book she could find on the wizarding world and even practiced a few simple spells, determined not to be left behind. When she fixed Harry Potter's glasses with a reparo on the train, it felt like proof she would be fine. Seeing Neville and watching Ron try a spell in another compartment reinforced her confidence. These children raised in the magical world did not seem that impressive. She could be top student again. She was sure of it. Then she met Ada. Ada single-handedly repelled a group of older students. Her magic was effortless. She cast spells without a wand. Seeing a girl barely older than herself move that way punctured Hermione's swelling pride like a pin. She wondered if that was the standard for magic-born children, and, more unsettling, whether the way Ada cast spells, so different from everything in Hermione's books, meant the rules she'd learned didn't apply at all. When school settled down, Hermione told herself she had overreacted. Ada was an anomaly, a singular exception. Hermione recovered her poise, went back to books, and soon earned herself the new nickname among classmates, Miss Know-It-All II. Becoming friends with Harry and Ron brought Hermione more information about Ada. To her surprise, Ada's background wasn't so different from her own, and that made Hermione admire her even more. Ada became an example to aspire to. Admiration, however, did not mean everything Ada said was beyond question. The conversation about Professor Snape that followed left Hermione flustered. In her eagerness, she had interrupted Ada and quickly apologized. I'm sorry, Ada. "I got carried away," she said. "But Professor Snape did try to hurt Harry. I read about that method in a book. The caster must hold eye contact with the target. At the time, I saw Snape staring at Harry without blinking." Ada looked at Hermione with something like recognition, a younger version of herself, self-assured and ready to trust her own judgment above all else. Ada, who was still very self-confident, had no intention of crushing Hermione's spirit, but she enjoyed correcting her. "Is what you see necessarily the whole truth?" she asked. "Is what you think necessarily correct?" Hermione's certainty wavered, but I really saw it. Her voice trailed off as doubt crept in. Hagrid had said Snape couldn't have harmed Harry. Now Ada said the same thing. Could she have been mistaken? Yet how could she explain the moment when Harry's broom behaved oddly and then, after she interrupted Snape, returned to normal? Ada watched Hermione puzzle it out and felt an odd swell of satisfaction. Persuading someone who prided themselves on being right had a rush she didn't expect, strangely like the thrill she imagined others got from mastering something difficult. Harry and Ron, meanwhile, seemed almost amused or bewildered. They were still fixed on their own impressions and not following Ada's line of reasoning. "You mean what I saw might not have been the whole picture?" Hermione asked, less sure now. The hint was all Ada needed. She nodded and said plainly, "Professor Snape is unpleasant, sarcastic, and easy to dislike. People look at him and assume he must be the villain, but dislike is not proof." Hermione began to replay that afternoon in the corridors, searching for details she might have missed. Had her dislike of Snape colored her perception? Had bias made her misread a moment? Harry, who had been distracted, snapped back into the argument. "Professor Snape was on the 4th floor corridor on Halloween. He must have gone there to steal the Philosopher's Stone while everyone was distracted," he insisted. He was convinced, and nothing Ada said could budge him. "I also went to the 4th floor when the troll was loose," Ada shot back. "Does that mean I was trying to steal the stone? I'm curious about it, yes. Turning lead into gold is intriguing, but not immortality. Who wants to live forever and watch everyone else die? Riches are tempting. Immortality is a nightmare." Ada's admission was honest. The idea of making gold had an appeal. If she ran short of money, simple transmutation would be convenient. But she also understood the practical consequences. Stealing the stone would risk Azkaban, and Dumbledore would never let someone walk away with it. The few quick paths to wealth the law allowed were not worth a prison sentence. She fancied a life of ease, not a life chasing impossible possession at the cost of everything. Harry, however, stuck to emotion and sensation. He pointed to the scar on his forehead and said, "When Snape looks at me, it hurts. He has motive. He must want to hurt me." Ada had no answer that would satisfy Harry. He had been wronged, or thought he had, and his conviction was immovable. All the clever arguments in the world meant nothing without evidence. Ada could persuade Hermione with logic and a nudge of doubt. She could not uproot Harry's feeling that Snape was the enemy. Finally, Ada conceded it was pointless to keep arguing. Dumbledore, Snape, or Quirrell would be the ones to settle this, and Ada could not summon any of them or compel them to do her bidding. She had no evidence to present and no status to force a confrontation. Letting it play out made more sense. The truthful and the false would clear themselves in time. Snape himself was not pressing the issue, and if he was indeed innocent, he would not need Ada's hurried defense. Ada decided to step back. People would keep their opinions for now. Harry, stubborn and unshakable. Hermione, thoughtful and willing to question herself. The rest, whatever, leaned toward the dramatic. When the truth came to light, as truths often do, it would rearrange whatever tidy convictions the school had built. Until then, there was no point in chasing ghosts. The little debate in the Hogwarts library ended on an oddly gentle note. Both sides argued whether Snape was the mastermind, but the whole exchange stayed civilized, restrained, almost polite. That restraint was mostly thanks to Ada. She kept things from exploding and steered the conversation back to calm. Because of her, the two opponents were able to shake hands and call it a truce without either side conceding. In the end, neither convinced the other. Each remained convinced of their own truth and thought the other was simply blinded. Harry was certain he was the only one who saw Snape for what he really was. All of Snape's past behavior, he argued, had been preparation to steal the Philosopher's Stone. Harry alone had discovered the truth, and that was why Snape wanted to kill him. Everyone else was asleep. He alone was sober and bore the responsibility of protecting the stone at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Ida, for her part, saw Harry as pitiable but noble. She didn't bother to correct his misconceptions or argue with the way he looked at her. What she wanted to know was when Quirrell would finally show himself, when he would move to steal the stone, and what preparations Dumbledore had made. She didn't believe Dumbledore relied only on an unreliable three-headed dog. One more thing puzzled her. How a boy so young could be willing to give his life to protect the stone. If she'd understood that sooner, she thought, she would have taken off her hat in respect. Ida was not a selfless person by nature. She saw not harming society as her greatest contribution, but she had a deep respect for people who carried true righteousness in their hearts. Heroes mattered. Without them, the world lost something precious. So the two went their separate ways. Ida kept an eye on Quirrell. Harry clung to the idea that Snape was the threat. Dumbledore must be sleeping soundly at night. He had a spy watching the mastermind and another watching Snape. It was a win-win. Winter arrived. Several storms buried the castle in white, and the students went back to the old snowball fight tradition, digging pits and burying the losers under blank tombs. Maybe the Scottish cold had chilled whatever fire Quirrell once had, or maybe he was just a coward. Ever since Halloween, ever since the troll and the attempted attack on Harry, Quirrell had done nothing. He looked less like a villain and more like someone killing time until his next payday. No ambition, no drive. Ada's verdict was simple: disappointment. Compared to Benedict Fooley, who had kept throwing himself into reckless stunts even when hurt, Quirrell was pathetic. Benedict had risked everything, kept pushing limits. Quirrell was just playing with people's emotions. Ida and the twins fretted. The semester was half over, and Quirrell still hadn't acted. She wanted to prod him, warm his lunch, shove him out the door. If she hadn't seen Snape watching Quirrell too, she would have suspected she'd misread him entirely. Maybe Quirrell was genuinely timid. Even Scabbers seemed braver. Quirrell's lack of progress didn't leave Ida without other things to do. During the end-of-year inventory, she realized several of her commonly used spells were nearly maxed out, and after some intense practice, they finally leveled up. Stupefy, her go-to combat spell, was the first to change. It now had two versions, the regular Stupefy and a charged Stupefy, that could, when Ada poured in enough magic, trigger a 15% chance of an added effect she called Graceful Relief. As the name implied, Graceful Relief was Ada's mercy, an enforced release from conflict that the target couldn't refuse. When Stupefy procured Graceful Relief, opponents couldn't defend. Unless they dodged or were shielded by an object, they were helpless. The spell's power also increased. Struck targets would be plunged into a coma, possibly a permanent sleep. A 15% chance sounds small, but it was meaningful. As Ida's familiarity with Stupefy grew, and she triggered Graceful Relief more often, the chance of it being unblockable would rise. 100% wasn't impossible if she ground hard enough. Other spells got upgrades too. Expelliarmus became smarter. It now identified the weapons an opponent held and disarmed the most dangerous one first. Among the improvements, the Protection Charm delighted Ida the most. It now behaved like a standing buff. While active, it reduced the effect of spells that hit her, minimizing the damage. It wasn't infinite. The charm had thresholds. Once the accumulated spell damage exceeded its limit, or a single attack exceeded the limit, the protection collapsed and had to be reapplied. Ada tried to figure out whether she could stack the charm into invulnerability, but the system blocked that. Each cast simply refreshed the protection, so her dream of stacking impenetrable armor was stillborn. Even so, the protection charm was a huge step up. Facing an evenly matched or stronger foe, the charm gave her a chance to trade injuries for survival. It wasn't a defense against an endless barrage of killing curses, but it would let her tank some blows and keep fighting. She thought back to the confrontation with the scrawny Peter Lorre. If she'd had this layer of protection earlier, she could have taken Turner Boobrien's Stupefy and finished the fight herself. As her skills improved, she believed the protective effect would too. Maybe one day she'd even be able to stand up to a killing curse. If that ever happened, could she call herself the girl who lived? The next update will be at night. 171. Fred and George's highlights. The recent round of spell upgrades had given Ada a noticeable boost. As her skills improved, so did her confidence. She felt like she could take on 10 people at once. Whether she'd win was another matter. More likely, she'd be ganged up on and end up back in St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Hogwarts' gossip feed was still fixated on the troll incident, and Ada found herself grumbling again about Quirrell's incompetence. Christmas break was nearly upon them, and he still behaved as if nothing was wrong, doing none of the things a defense against the dark arts professor ought to do. Maybe she was too harsh. Finishing a single class properly seemed to require extraordinary effort from him, as if he needed incense burned and ancestral ghosts summoned just to get through a lecture. The semester was half over, and they'd covered less than a quarter of the syllabus. What other professors managed in one lesson might take Quirrell 3 or 4. His stutter was only part of the problem. The bigger issues were timidity and general ineptitude. Students often frightened him with pranks, and a few of those pranks had nearly sent him into a conniption. Quirrell would be scared out of his wits, but he never retaliated. Once the students learned they could torment him with impunity, they did so with increasing enthusiasm. Fortunately for Quirrell, this weekend he wouldn't have to face the worst of it. Most of the troublemakers, third years and above, had permission to visit Hogsmeade, the nearby wizarding village, on the weekend. First and second years weren't allowed to go, and even third years needed parental permission for those visits. Restrictions only made Hogsmeade more alluring, and nearly everyone who could go had gathered early that morning. This was the last chance before the Christmas holiday. Nobody wanted to miss it. Ada, Fred, and George weren't interested in the Hogsmeade outing. The three of them had the Marauder's map and already knew 7 secret passages to the village. They could go whenever they liked without asking the school. 2 days of heavy snow lay everywhere, crunching underfoot, and a few younger students were having a friendly snowball fight. Seeing that, Fred and George couldn't help themselves. Their hands went itchy. They started rolling snowballs as they walked, ready to pelt anyone they recognized. Ada refused to join. Her hands were too sensitive to the cold. If she needed a snowball, she could take one the twins made, or she'd simply knock someone over and bury them in a drift. Fred and George kept rolling until their balls grew large. They were in high spirits and dragged Ada along to build a snowman. Ada stood with her arms crossed, refusing to freeze her hands into little icicles. "Ada, you've got 2 choices," Fred declared. "Either you help us build, or we throw you into the snowdrift. Tell us your choice." Pressured by their grins, she relented and started rolling, and despite her complaints, she found the motion oddly calming, if a bit numbing. When the big base was finished, Ada went back into the castle to scrounge for arms. A draft swept the corridor, and she grabbed 2 brooms at random, breaking the handles underfoot so they'd look like stick arms. They were probably Filch's. Hopefully, Mrs. Norris wouldn't point him to the lost and found. Back outside, Fred and George had already set a medium-sized snowball atop the base. Ada shoved in the broken broom handles. The twins fitted 2 matching stones for eyes, and Ada untied the red ribbon from her hair to make the snowman's mouth. They stood back and admired their handiwork, but something felt off. Whose snowman didn't have a nose? They were still debating the nasal question when Professor Quirrell appeared. Any hope the snowman would get a nose evaporated. The twins' attention snapped from the sculpture to their new target. Without even exchanging a look, they went into action, rolling a couple of compact snowballs and hurling them at Quirrell. Both struck. When an audience was present, Quirrell always slipped into performance mode. Hit by the snow, he didn't show anger so much as a theatrical shriek, as if a banshee had embraced him from behind. The reaction only egged Fred and George on. They produced their wands and charmed some snowballs to chase him, turning a prank into a spectacle. The enchanted balls streaked after Quirrell, who, momentarily stunned by his own histrionics, only began to run when someone shouted at him. He might have ended the chase with a flick of his wand. The balls would have collapsed. But he didn't. To everyone watching, he looked as terrified as if a troll were on his heels, arms over his head, running at full tilt. Ada found the whole scene hilarious, mentally grading Quirrell's performance as ostentatious and shallow. Tryouts, not Broadway. Whether he'd overheard her thoughts or simply realized how ridiculous he seemed, Quirrell turned and sprinted for the castle. But he didn't make it clear of them. Faster charm-enhanced snowballs caught up with him and plastered against his turban. Boring, Fred complained. We humiliated him for ages and he still acts like that. I don't know whether he's just a coward or hopelessly committed to his role. They didn't even high-five, disappointed with the show. Next time, George said, brightening, let's take his precious turban. Both twins stared at Quirrell's protected head. He hadn't been shielding just his head. He'd been guarding the turban itself. Ada, who'd assumed he was merely trying to keep his head warm, hadn't noticed until they pointed it out. She was still wondering why the turban mattered so much when Quirrell did something she didn't expect. He went to Professor McGonagall and reported the incident, and somehow included Ada among the witnesses. The twins, still scheming about how to get hold of the turban, had no idea what they'd set in motion. For them, the hit to Quirrell's turban would prove an unexpectedly bright moment, one of the little highlights that, sooner than Ada would guess, would form part of a much larger story, long before any of them had to face Lord Voldemort. 172. The world-famous painting, The Three of Us. It was a Hogsmeade weekend, and the school had allowed students to visit the village. To keep anyone from sneaking off, several professors were checking the parent-signed permission slips, Professor McGonagall taking primary responsibility. She had spent nearly the whole morning on it before returning to her office to catch up on her own work. McGonagall sat at her desk, finishing a transfiguration paper she had been preparing with Ada. When it was complete, she would publish it and include Ada as co-author. It was a deliberate act. McGonagall was clearing a path for Ada in the academic world of transfiguration. If Ada ever chose to go into research, this paper would be her foothold. Had it been published under Ada's name alone, McGonagall knew the old guard would have torn the unknown rookie apart, just as they'd savaged Bathsheba Babbling when she published her runes paper. McGonagall did not want Ada to face that kind of vitriol and feared Ada might lose control and storm Flamingo through the Flu network. Better Ada's name beside hers. Anyone who dared attack McGonagall's judgment in Transfiguration would quickly find themselves looking foolish. She was writing furiously when Professor Quirrell came in, all complaint and tears about Ada and the twins. He wailed like a wronged man, recounting every slight he claimed to have suffered. McGonagall listened with no sympathy. She struggled to keep from showing disdain. A professor, a man, bullied by his students for half a term and reduced to running to the deputy headmistress in tears, it struck her as ridiculous. Quirrell's large head and turban made him look even more pitiable as he blustered on, but McGonagall's thoughts kept drifting back to Ada. She wasn't surprised to hear Ada's name in his accusations. If anything, she expected it. That didn't mean she wasn't annoyed. Quirrell was a fellow professor. She didn't think Ada should treat him so. She wrote a quick note, folded the paper into a little enchanted paper airplane, and sent it skimming out of the office. About 15 minutes later, Ada and the Weasley twins arrived, summoned by the flying note. The small second-floor office suddenly felt crowded. Ada, Fred, and George stood before McGonagall with their heads bowed, adopting that familiar look of contrition she had seen many times over the past 3 years. Admit, correct, repeat. To anyone who didn't know the full history, it might have looked like iron discipline. To McGonagall, it was education in progress. Under her stern gaze, they offered their apologies to the stricken Quirrell. Outwardly, he accepted them and forgave them, but McGonagall could see he felt exposed. Even with her hair falling over her face, Ada's eyes met his and held a look that seemed to say, "Keep pretending. I'll see how long you can keep it up." Flustered, Quirrell made an excuse and hurried out. The office fell silent once he left. McGonagall sat back, rubbing her temples. The twins were impervious to every tactic she'd tried. Getting them to behave was almost impossible. Ada had once been responsive to gentle measures, but after the broomstick incident, McGonagall suspected she'd become stubbornly unyielding. It dawned on her that Ada's silence was sulking rather than illness, an amusing and slightly frustrating realization. A reminder from a fellow teacher brought the culprit into focus: the broomstick. McGonagall felt equal parts vexation and pleasure, annoyed that Ada was upset over something so small, and pleased that the girl cared enough to sulk for her sake. "I wonder," McGonagall said, taking off her glasses, "how it is that you three are always in the middle of everything." "Believe me, Professor, I ask myself the same thing every year," Fred replied solemnly, as if the question truly weighed on him. Mischief was as much a part of the twins as breathing. Ada only rolled her eyes. "Tell me," McGonagall went on, "what happened today? And don't try to fool me with lame excuses." They'd practiced a cover on the way to the office, but McGonagall had anticipated that too. The three exchanged looks and decided to tell the truth. Ada stepped forward and explained their suspicions about Quirrell and how they had tried to test him. "You threw snowballs at Quirrell to see if he'd give himself away?" McGonagall asked, already thinking this was worse than she'd imagined. "Yes, Professor. We think Quirrell is after the Philosopher's Stone, so we wanted to force him to show his true colors," George said, matter-of-factly. McGonagall froze. Who had told them about the Philosopher's Stone? Hagrid? Her voice went tight as she imitated Quirrell's stammer. How did you know about the Philosopher's Stone?" "We didn't only hear of it," Ada replied. "Harry Potter knows too. I've asked you and Professor Snape so many times and got nothing. If it weren't for the boy who lived, we'd still be in the dark." McGonagall sat very still. She needed a moment to absorb this, and at the same time, she felt a flare of irritation at Quirrell for being discovered so easily. She straightened and spoke coldly. "I don't care where you heard about the stone or how you came to that conclusion. This matter is not for students to meddle in." She made her voice absolute. "The Philosopher's Stone is being kept under the strictest secrecy. No one is to interfere." "But Professor, even if I don't interfere," Ada began. "Enough, Ada," McGonagall snapped. "Are you ignoring me? Didn't I tell you not to go near it?" Yes," Ada mumbled. "Then what did you do?" McGonagall demanded. Ada was speechless. She had been right there. She had even seen the three-headed dog. She'd had the mad idea of opening the trapdoor and going down to look. That she had controlled herself was, McGonagall thought with relief, some small miracle. "Now," McGonagall continued, "back to your dormitories at once. If I catch you discussing the Philosopher's Stone in private again, you'll be keeping Filch company indefinitely." With no choice, Ada and the twins left the office. McGonagall knew she could not watch them every minute. They would doubtless keep the conversation alive among themselves. She put away the unfinished paper and tried to return to her work, but the matter had unsettled her. There was no way she could continue writing while her thoughts were so disturbed. Closing the desk, she hurried out of the office. She needed to speak to Dumbledore. The whole arrangement was starting to put students at risk and required adjustment. Thanks to reader Cho Chang for the reward. 173. Lend it to me for 2 days. Ida and the twins didn't know that Professor McGonagall had gone to see Dumbledore after she sent them away, and of course they had no idea what the two of them had discussed. They also had no time to question Quirrell further. Although McGonagall had thrown them out of her office, the trio couldn't escape punishment. It was only delayed. Whatever Quirrell's true nature, Ida and the twins had been plainly disrespectful to a professor, and the punishment was not unfair. McGonagall's reprimand was meant as much as a warning as a punishment. Stay away from the Philosopher's Stone and do not get involved. Ida, who hated work as a matter of principle, was sent to polish the trophy room. The energetic twins were sent to the library to help keep order. McGonagall had hit the mark perfectly. Each of them had reason to complain. In the library, the twins were driven half-mad with boredom. Ida was exhausted from scrubbing brass and glass. "Why does Hogwarts have so many trophies that need polishing?" she complained more than once. Their resentment toward Quirrell deepened. Every time they saw him in class, they gritted their teeth and wanted to tear him apart. McGonagall had not expected her discipline to backfire like this. Rather than making them forget the stone, it made them angrier. Fortunately for all of them, the punishment would end before the Christmas holidays. Hogwarts emptied out as the holidays approached. The day before term ended, old Errol braved a snowstorm to arrive with a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Weasley for Harry. The couple had decided to visit Charlie in Romania for Christmas and, after much thought, left Harry at school instead of bringing him to the burrow. Ida had to unpack the suitcase she had just packed for the trip. The castle felt hollow and quiet, and even the Great Hall looked almost abandoned at mealtimes. When he learned Ida would be staying for the holidays, Snape immediately decided she needed extra lessons. Better to keep her under supervision brewing potions than letting her roam free and cause trouble. After dinner, Ida went to Snape's office ready to begin, but Snape, dark-faced, told her to go elsewhere. He sent her to another classroom where Dumbledore would be waiting. Snape's expression reminded Ida of younger teachers she'd known in her previous life. Those who had fought for a gym period only to be outmaneuvered by senior staff. She was the unlucky pupil who had just lost a class. Following Snape's directions, she found the classroom, but Dumbledore hadn't arrived yet. The room looked unused. Desks and chairs were stacked against the wall, wastebaskets overturned, a light film of dust on most surfaces. One thing, however, stood out. A tall, ornate mirror leaned against the far wall. It was clean and seemed recently moved. It reached nearly to the ceiling, its frame gilded and carved, standing on two clawed feet. An inscription ran along the top. Erisid strau oit ube kafru oit on wosi. Ada stepped in front of the mirror, but it did not show her reflection. Instead, it displayed a young couple she did not recognize, tenderly holding a newborn Harry, smiling as if the baby were the greatest joy in the world. The scene shifted, and the couple and baby vanished, replaced by the face of a young man, healthy and rosier than any version of himself Ida had seen in the school. She stopped looking, stepped back, and peered at the inscription instead. She walked around the room, repeating the strange words to herself until, on her 10th turn, she understood. Reversing the letters spelled a sentence in plain English. I show not your face, but your heart's desire. That explained why she hadn't seen her reflection. The mirror showed what a person wanted most. Everything Ida had ever longed for, her parents' love, a healthy body, was missing from her life. The mirror reflected desires she felt keenly. I'm glad you did not lose yourself here, Dumbledore's voice said gently from the doorway. It seems you already understand its magic. Ida started. Professor, when did you? She had no idea when he had entered the room. If he had been an enemy, she might have been dead. Dumbledore joined her at the mirror. Do not underestimate yourself. I am Albus Dumbledore, he said plainly, as if reading her thoughts. Compared to him, she felt like a newborn. Would you mind telling an old man what Miss Tryst saw? He asked. Ida answered with a half-truth. I saw myself using the Philosopher's Stone to make a lot of gold, enough to last a lifetime. What about you? Dumbledore smiled. I saw someone give me a pair of woolen socks. People send me books all the time. No one ever thinks to get me socks. He added with a twinkle, You must have that problem too. They both knew they were not being literal. What each saw was not what they claimed. But none of them pressed the matter. Some things did not need to be spoken plainly. Ida conceded with a nod. Books are nice, but always getting books would be boring. A big box of chocolate frogs now and then would be better. Minerva and Severus have both been to see me recently. Guess what they came to discuss, Dumbledore said, looking at the mirror with a faint, hidden longing he did not share. It must be about the stone, Ida said. Precisely. That is why I let you see this mirror, Dumbledore said, laying a hand on its surface. I shall use it to help protect the Philosopher's Stone. You need not worry about its safety. Ida wasn't terribly worried. If Quirrell was plotting something clever and Dumbledore did not yet stop him, then Dumbledore could bury himself for all she cared. Still, she couldn't help a small itch of envy. I admit I'm a little jealous of Quirrell, she said, changing her tone. I have ideas about the stone too, but I can't do the same things he does. He's so useless that it makes me impatient. I almost want to help him. Dumbledore laughed, genuinely amused. Desire for the stone was not a sin in itself. It mattered whether one acted on it. Ada's admission was candid and harmless compared to Quirrell's secretive actions. Ida straightened, meeting Dumbledore's eyes. Professor, how about a deal? Could you lend me the Philosopher's Stone for 2 days? Chapter 174, Disney Princess on the Run. While others might be obsessed with ghosts or lust, Ada was different. She was obsessed with money. The twins, difficult as they were, had judged her correctly. Ada clung to every nut as if it were sewn to her ribs. Spending felt like losing a piece of herself. With money-wet eyes, she treated life as expendable and gold as everything. If any petty thief dared lift her purse, Ada would chase him to the ends of the earth. Everyone has desires, and desires often drive people forward. Dumbledore didn't find Ada's love of money vulgar. She didn't steal or rob. What was wrong with liking shiny things? "I'm very sorry," he said politely, "but the Philosopher's Stone does not belong to me. I am merely holding it for its owner." He couldn't make the decision for Nicholas Flamel. Ada hadn't expected him to hand it over. This was the only Philosopher's Stone in the whole magical world. If he had agreed, she wouldn't have dared take it. Who knew what trap might lie beneath? "However," Dumbledore added, "if you can take the stone before Quirrell does, or before I send it away, I will turn a blind eye. You have 2 days." Ada knew what the stone could do. The elixir of life required constant drinking to maintain life, and stopping meant death. But Ada wanted it only for 2 days. Vague, yes, but proof she wasn't after immortality. She wanted to transmute metal into gold. Dumbledore believed his protections would deter anyone who truly desired the stone. Quirrell had failed, and if someone wanted it for themselves, they could not pass those wards. By offering a cheap promise, he might earn a potential ally, someone who, motivated by money, might help protect Harry and the stone. For Dumbledore, it seemed a no-lose deal. A few words, the hint of goodwill, and a watchful hand added to his defenses. Ada looked at him and saw nothing but calm blue eyes. She was certain the old headmaster was trying to trick her. "Professor," she said, "you're being a bit sneaky. I'm sure you've dug a pit, and you want me to fall into it with my own consent. After that, I won't even have anywhere to throw a tantrum. You jumped in willingly once. Now it's too late to regret. Once you're on this train, the doors are welded shut, and no one gets off until the final destination." Dumbledore wouldn't have said it like that, but Ada felt the meaning. Finding a gentle and understanding older guardian for Harry was both useful and effortless for him. Harry Potter had a stubborn cowlick no shampoo could tame. Rumors of parseltongue and other oddities swirled. Dumbledore himself was said to speak with merpeople. Harry had been marked by Voldemort's killing curse, far worse than any poisoned apple. The Dursleys had never treated him well. If not abuse, it came close. Many people had helped Harry, Hermione Granger, Dumbledore, and perhaps Ada in the future. In Ada's head, Harry became Hogwarts' runaway Disney princess, protected, fussed over, and incidentally taking revenge. Ada turned toward the Mirror of Erised. In its glass, the young couple with a baby appeared again, and the healthy, rosy-faced person she longed to be. This time, the vision included her too, Ada holding the red Philosopher's Stone, making a heap of scrap metal flash into pure gold. The mirror's test demanded you let go of your deepest desire. Ada knew she couldn't. She might look 14, but her heart was older and tainted. Rebirth hadn't made her innocent again. The Mirror of Erised didn't just test, it cleansed, and she could not cleanse herself. "In life, setbacks and opportunities often come hand in hand," Dumbledore said. His tone softened. "What matters is seizing the opportunity and overcoming the obstacle." He spoke like a careful healer, handing over a hastily made bowl of chicken soup, gentleness wrapped around firmness. "Why do you want so much money?" he asked. "Afraid of poverty," Ada answered in 3 words that held more than 3 meanings. Dumbledore saw her smile, but not the way her fingers clenched behind her back until they went pale. Abandoned at 2 months and twice passed from foster home to foster home, had left her with a lasting insecurity. She could have stayed at the orphanage or at the Weasleys during holidays, living off Hogwarts' modest relief funds. Instead, she took jobs at Flourish and Blots in the Leaky Cauldron, so she would always have something tucked away for an emergency. If one day the Weasleys no longer wanted her, if Hogwarts couldn't keep her, she wanted money enough to find shelter, someplace out of the rain. That fear explained why she'd reacted so strongly when Professor McGonagall gave Harry a flying broomstick. Crisis, perceived in a flash, spurred her protective instincts. "By the way," Dumbledore said casually, Did you and the two Weasleys enjoy your time at the Shrieking Shack? Ada didn't want to talk about it. She suspected Dumbledore asked to steer her away from angrier topics. She glanced at his waist. He wasn't wearing any precious metals, and wondered if the headmaster knew everything he seemed to know. There were few secrets at Hogwarts that could hide from him. If you have the time, you should visit the cottage, Ada said, audaciously offering hospitality. Winnie helped me a lot. It's very cozy. Dumbledore's eyes suddenly gleamed with something like mischief. Promise me one thing, he said, and the light in his eyes sharpened into a plan anyone could see if they bothered to look. If you do, then whether it's the Shrieking Shack or Twilight Cottage, from now on, you shall be their true owner. Ada realized then the pit had been dug and laid plain. The choice of how and whether to jump was entirely hers. 175. Christmas is a day for receiving goods before. The pit was blocking the path, so she had no choice but to jump. If she had to leap, she might as well pick a pose she liked, at least to save face. Esmeralda mentally ran through options. A triple somersault with a half twist, a backward 2.5. Would her splash earn a standing ovation? Before she could settle on anything, Dumbledore spoke again. He didn't wait for her reply. When he finished his sentence, he simply left. If Harry wants to suspect Severus, let him suspect, Dumbledore had said. Just make sure he doesn't get involved with Quirrell. That's what I'm asking you to do, Esmeralda. Dumbledore strolled from the classroom with his hands clasped behind his back, leaving Esmeralda, whose head was still full of diving moves, alone. In the now empty room, she could only stew in helpless frustration. She wanted to grab Dumbledore's beard and demand an explanation, but she didn't dare. Esmeralda Twister, reckless and cowardly in perfect balance, really wanted to ask him what year she was in, what year Harry Potter was in, and how, short of dragging him off to another school, she was supposed to keep Harry from getting involved with Quirrell. She couldn't exactly gather her friends to roust Harry so he wouldn't attend Defense Against the Dark Arts, could she? Or should she go audit the first-year classroom herself and physically interrupt Quirrell if he tried to speak to Harry? Beating up Quirrell and making him unable to teach felt more reliable than either option. But Dumbledore probably wouldn't like that. If 3 consecutive Defense Against the Dark Arts professors ended up incapacitated, recruiting the next one would be even harder. And keeping Harry away from Quirrell would only distance him from the truth, making him even more convinced that Snape was the one after the Philosopher's Stone. That way, as long as Harry didn't personally go to protect the stone, he'd be safe. Snape would never really harm a student's life. Snape's damage was always verbal and psychological, things Harry had already experienced. Esmeralda felt a little irrationally envious of Harry. No one had taken care to protect her like that, to keep her out of danger. She pressed her smooth forehead to the mirror of Erised and thought, despite the shine on her forehead, it still needed a scar for proper ornamentation. If Snape read her mind, the professor would probably set up a whole line of cauldrons for her and drive her to a nervous breakdown. Some kinds of forgetfulness shouldn't be like this. Snape had protected her before. He just did it in a way most people didn't notice, and even if they had noticed, they wouldn't listen, still determined to pry open the truth. Professor Snape was truly wronged. Not only wronged, but the black pot he carried kept getting bigger and bigger. Christmas break had officially begun, but Esmeralda felt it would have been better not to have a break at all. This holiday was more exhausting than the term. Wizard chess, card games, she hadn't touched gobstones once. The break had been entirely split between Professor McGonagall and Snape. In the mornings, she had private transfiguration instruction with McGonagall and an essay to write on the vanishing spell. Her head was already full of Gamp's law of transfiguration and all its corollaries. In the afternoons, she reported to Snape, who, as a proper professor, had taken on a stack of potion orders that she had to finish before Christmas. Probably to punish her earlier sarcasm, Snape nagged her constantly in 3D surround. Who could stand that? She endured until evening to find a pile of holiday homework waiting, enough to bury her. What happened to the promised happy education? Why so much homework? Once term started, could the professors even get through it all? As far as Esmeralda knew, there were no parchment recyclers at Hogwarts. She didn't know who would buy so much paper. Under the care of the two professors, Esmeralda not only lost the urge to trouble Quirrell, she felt living through Christmas in one piece would be an achievement. Still, she needn't worry too much. Unless she died suddenly, Snape and Madame Pomfrey could put her back together and she'd resume her unfinished business. On Christmas morning, Esmeralda slept in, unusually. If hunger hadn't woken her, she might have slept until afternoon. The morning sun was bright, and she shielded her eyes with a hand. After downing a large glass of water, still half asleep, she hauled herself from bed, pulled back the curtains she had forgotten the night before, and let softer light into the dormitory. Sitting on the edge of her bed, nibbling a small cake from her bedside table and twirling her long hair, she ran through whether she'd forgotten to give anyone a present. She didn't want another awkwardness with Cedric. Last Christmas, she'd given Cedric nothing. This year, the first gift she prepared was for the Hufflepuff boy. She'd heard he'd started noticing girls, so Esmeralda gave Cedric a book about love, usefulness depending on his own effort. With his looks, it probably didn't matter. As long as he behaved himself, he'd charm the girls. She had similar small presents for her roommates. Quidditch merch they liked, new posters and match compilations. Lee Jordan, this year, didn't get Esmeralda's perfunctory candy. Instead, she gave him a lion head hat that could emit a roar. He could wear it while commentating a match. True Gryffindor support. For the twins, she bought work clothes made of dragon hide to protect them during their fireworks experiments. Their research had made headway, and they needed safer gear for new designs. The candy she usually gave Lee went to Ron and Harry this year. Fred and George, for her lost glove, had given 2 pairs in return. Same style in black and blue, with a warming charm like a hand warmer. She'd wrapped 3 more gifts, a special shampoo for Snape, a hand-knit scarf for Professor McGonagall, not very pretty, she admitted, and fudge and thick wool socks for Dumbledore. She'd wanted to send fudge and every flavor beans, but the wool socks idea came up later. She'd thought about knitting them herself, but the holiday had been too busy, so she ordered a pair, more likely to fit than something she might botch. After about 10 minutes of waking up slowly, Esmeralda finally opened her presents. On top was Dumbledore's, a large box of candy, a mix of brands surely selected to suit him, so many odd favorites. Under that was a whole new set of clothes from Professor McGonagall and a copy of Transfiguration Weekly. Esmeralda flipped through the magazine and found McGonagall's essay inside. She resolved to show off the copy to the twins later. Angelina and Alicia had each given her a very expensive quill, one she'd seen in a Hogsmeade shop, with automatic error correction and associative memory. She'd been showered with snacks this year. Katie, Lee, Cedric, Harry, and Ron had all sent treats. Looking at the bed strewn with sweets, Esmeralda suddenly felt a twinge of toothache and wondered what potion could cure it. At the very bottom of the pile was a cozy sweater from Mrs. Weasley. Unlike last year, Esmeralda accepted it with genuine gratitude. The color had changed from red to blue, but Mrs. Weasley's care was the same. I feel like I've been a bit lazy lately, and my head's not in the best place, Esmeralda thought, setting a small personal challenge. 3 updates tomorrow. 176. The joys and sorrows of people are not the same. The girls' dormitory on Christmas morning was a wreck, colorful wrapping paper scattered across the floor. They didn't manage to clear it until Esmeralda had washed up and changed. After half a semester of practice, her silent casting had improved a great deal. Many everyday spells came to her silently now. She could even cast them that way in real combat, though the effects were a touch weaker, and she still needed steady practice. Dressed in fresh clothes, Esmeralda left the dorm and went down to the common room. Because of the holidays, few students remained at school. Only the Weasleys were left, laughing and playing. Fred and George, both in blue sweaters, were trying to force a sweater onto Percy. The twins, carefree as ever, managed to pull it over him. Percy's glasses were crooked and his hair stuck up in a bird's nest. Ron, in a magenta sweater, and Harry, in a bright green one, watched the performance. As always, Harry wore a lovingly knitted sweater from Mrs. Weasley, a tradition that had started in his first year. Esmeralda sank into an armchair. The twins wandered over and sat down, finally abandoning Percy. With his arms pinned by the sweater, Percy had to tug it off with Ron's help and set aside the one with a large P on the chest. "Does that P stand for prefect or Percy?" Esmeralda asked with a smile. Percy, already pink, went redder. He stammered, "Of course it means Percy, just like your E stands for your name." "Mom wouldn't think you'd forget your own name," Fred said, pointing to the G on his chest. "So it means prefect. Maybe I should suggest Mrs. Weasley change one P into two so it's both prefect and Percy," Esmeralda said with mock seriousness. "Why not three?" George held up 3 fingers. "Then it could be poor, prefect, Percy. When Mom gets back from Romania, I'll write to her." The 3 of them sat together, teasing the blushing Percy. All 3 in blue sweaters. If Esmeralda's hair were fiery red, they'd look like triplets. "Esmeralda, what are you holding?" Harry asked, noticing the magazine she kept clutching. Fred snatched it, flipped to the bookmarked page, and read aloud. "The Vanishing and Conjuring Spells. Authors, Minerva McGonagall, Esmeralda Twister." "So you're just showing off that your name's in the Transfiguration magazine you always read?" George asked, cocking his head. "We don't care about the magazine. We want to know if you got paid." "The pay is nothing compared to having my name there." Esmeralda snatched the magazine back. "Maybe one day your Transfiguration textbooks will be written by me." Fred shook his head. "I don't think we'll live that long, right, George?" "Exactly." George wandered over, patted Ron on the shoulder, and said solemnly, "Ron, that's your task. If it comes to it, stay back a year or 2. Wait until Esmeralda writes the Transfiguration book." "Absolutely not. Mum would kill me," Ron protested, very firm. Between Mrs. Weasley and Esmeralda, Mrs. Weasley plainly held the greater destructive power. They chatted, content and free of worries about Philosopher's Stones, Quirrell, or Snape. Harry, sitting beside Ron, enjoyed the simple scene. This, a table full of friends, harmless teasing and warmth, was the life he wanted. A noisy group of Weasleys burst into the great hall a short while later. Red hair everywhere, a long-haired blonde girl and a dark-haired boy among them, and Percy being dragged in by the twins, still shouting, "Let me go!" and "Don't run, jump, or play in the corridors." The professors at the staff table didn't scold them, they smiled. Even the usually severe Professor McGonagall was smiling. As she'd done before, Esmeralda made a beeline for the teacher's table just before the Christmas feast formally began, to bribe the professors with treats. Her robe pockets were bulging with candy. She'd scurried back to her dorm to pack them, taking a handful from every tin. Professor McGonagall watched Esmeralda approach, a warm light in her eyes. She wore the gold and red scarf Esmeralda had knitted and given her. The scarf wasn't a masterpiece. Parts were more gold, others more red, and the lion pattern was barely recognizable. But McGonagall treasured the sentiment and wore it proudly. It was plainly hand-knitted by a beginner. If she hadn't been a Gryffindor, she might never have guessed what the pattern was meant to be. Esmeralda had originally planned to give the imperfect ones to the house elf, but house elves don't accept clothing, so the leftovers went to the twins. At first, the other professors were surprised that McGonagall would wear such an odd scarf. When they learned Esmeralda had made it, their surprise turned into envy, jealousy, and a good-natured resentment. 2 of their expressions were particularly telling. Snape's sallow face darkened noticeably. Dumbledore suddenly grimaced, as if his woolen socks had started to itch. Esmeralda's generosity reached every teacher. Even Quirrell got a handful of sweets. Her impartiality was flawless. Seeing Quirrell's pleased, somewhat flattered expression, Esmeralda leaned over and told him, "Keep it up." Whether she meant he should keep up his teaching or hurry up and steal the Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell could interpret as he liked. When Esmeralda paused in front of Snape, their disdain met. They both frowned. Looking at his perpetually greasy hair, Esmeralda thought, "I gave you shampoos in every scent. Couldn't you pick one you liked? Would it kill you to wash it?" Snape, for his part, was no happier. He had been pleased when he first opened his small gift, until he saw the box of shampoos. He wanted to ask Esmeralda what she meant by giving him shampoo, and when he glanced at McGonagall's scarf, he only grew more sour. He accepted the candy with a dark face. Neither Snape nor Esmeralda noticed Quirrell watching them. After taking in their mutual disdain, Quirrell's gaze slid toward Harry among the students. Esmeralda set the rest of her candies in front of Dumbledore, and was about to move on when she heard him murmur under his breath. Perhaps because they're store-bought, these woolen socks do feel a bit scratchy. Dumbledore appeared to be talking to himself, but his words were clearly for Esmeralda. Even at over 100, he was a fine actor, far better at it than some people, she thought. The last stop was always Professor McGonagall. Esmeralda set her candies before her, and McGonagall pointed to the scarf at her throat. "I do like this scarf," she said, smiling, "especially after hearing about the scratchy woolen socks." Everyone, young and old alike, turned to look at the unperturbed Dumbledore. Their laughter made him feel particularly conspicuous. 177. Our brother is very brave. A 1,000-year-old castle in Scotland ought to feel a little eerie, like those famous haunted castles in Britain, yet Hogwarts hummed with cheer. Today, the usual distinctions between professor and student had vanished. Everyone was celebrating the holiday and passing the joy around. Tall Hagrid drank cup after cup until his face reddened. Flushed and cheerful, he planted a kiss on Professor McGonagall's cheek. McGonagall only blushed and laughed. Ada, watching, was astonished. Rubus Hagrid truly lived up to Gryffindor's reputation. At last, Ada understood why he dared to raise Acromantulas and Cerberus. He was a born Braveheart. By comparison, the conniving Quirrell and the two-faced Snape seemed almost pathetic. From that moment on, Hagrid was Ada's idol. He wasn't handsome, he had a scraggly beard, and his cooking was terrible, but he was brave, and that was everything. Ada imagined herself telling everyone, "Our brother dares to raise Acromantulas and Cerberus. Does yours? Our brother dared to kiss Professor McGonagall. Does yours?" Who wouldn't adore a brother like that? She even planned a daily prophet piece titled, "Hagrid's Goodness." Everyone should know. Whether the whole world read it didn't matter. What mattered was that Hagrid would. Maybe, just maybe, he'd reward a devoted fan with a bottle of Acromantula venom. Ada and the twins returned to the common room, lugging a pile of wizard firecrackers. She perched a red hat on the little dog Galleon's head. After a while in the dormitory, the twins burst in, calling her name, restless and eager for a snowball fight. Ada told Fred to take Galleon along and slipped back under the covers. She had no intention of joining them. She fell asleep in the warm dormitory while the boys tore around outside all afternoon. Galleon ran with them until he, too, was soaked. When they came back in, Ada woke from a nap and blinked at 5 drenched boys. Had she not known they'd been throwing snowballs, she'd have thought they'd been swimming in the Black Lake, clothes and all. They lined up by the fire, steaming and warming themselves. Ada settled in an armchair, flipping through a book on alchemy. Both wizard and Muggle traditions had proud alchemical histories. She even recalled how some Muggle scientists had been obsessed with transforming base metals. Ada wasn't studying to become an alchemist. She was curious about the Philosopher's Stone and the rumor that it could turn lead into gold. It was a childish hope, like buying a lottery ticket, but it made for entertaining reading. No one else in the room shared her light curiosity. Only Percy might. Hermione, back with her family, would probably agree. Time at school crawled, but holidays flew by. You close your eyes, and it's suddenly time for class again. After Christmas, McGonagall and Snape had given Ada a few days' rest, and those pleasant, easy days vanished quickly. Students drifted back one by one, and Ada, still underrested, found herself plunged back into intense work. During the break, she'd forgotten one of Dumbledore's arrangements entirely and had paid no attention to whether Quirrell lingered around Harry. She'd been absorbed in her own affairs. It was only in those private days after Christmas that Ada noticed Harry's habit of night-wandering the castle. He looked perpetually half asleep during the day, with dark circles as if someone had punched him. Night after night, he seemed exhausted, as if addicted to nocturnal exploration. A few days later, the circles faded, and Harry was lively again, as if his private wanderings had stopped. Had Ada peeked at the Marauders map, she would have seen the truth. Harry, who had claimed he never left the common room, appearing in an empty classroom where the Mirror of Erised was kept. But she didn't. The twins hadn't used the map in a while, either. They knew the castle almost as well as Filch and no longer needed it to avoid the caretaker. Harry had received his father's invisibility cloak and, eager, had slipped out under it that very night. Draped in it, he could watch Ada and the twins by the fire without being seen. He wandered and stumbled upon the mirror. Its magic showed him his parents. Night after night, he sat before it, which explained the dark circles. He later met Dumbledore there, and the headmaster persuaded him to stop visiting the mirror, hence his recovery. Ada never learned any of that. She was still preoccupied with her own excellence and troubles. She had thought restarting school might be easier without the extra scrutiny of those two professors, but it turned out to be harder. Under Snape's orders, in addition to filling the usual potion requests, Ada had to brew 3 highly poisonous potions and 2 fire-resistant concoctions that required entirely different ingredients. The 2 fire-resistant potions were fiendishly delicate. Timing and heat had to be exact. Ada fretted over every simmer, terrified of singing her robes. It was while she was receiving Snape's private instruction that she heard the other news. Snape would be the referee for the Gryffindor versus Slytherin Quidditch match. Ada looked at him teasingly. He must be worried about Harry, and so had volunteered to referee. Snape turned his back, avoiding her eyes, and politely kicked her out of his office. He couldn't bear those inquisitive looks. The announcement exploded through Gryffindor like wildfire. What could be worse? Hardly anything. When Ada told Oliver Wood, the captain, he lost sleep. If the captain couldn't rest, neither could the team. Everyone assumed Snape would be biased. The match mattered. A win was essential if Gryffindor were to challenge Slytherin for the Quidditch Cup. Snape's partiality was legendary, so the team feared he'd tilt the game against them. Fred and George grumbled too, even though they knew Snape wasn't a mustache-twirling villain and had protected Harry in the past. His record still bred mistrust. With morale shaken, Wood intensified training. Neither heavy snow nor endless gray days could halt his determination. Meanwhile, Ada's role in passing along the news had nothing to do with the newest message she received. Dumbledore had summoned her for private guidance. Give advice. The sky was gloomy and oppressive. Not only was the weather foul, but the ground had turned into a mass of mud. Several days of continuous rain had left countless puddles on the school grounds, and Ada had to pick her way carefully along the path to avoid splashing her shoes and robes. She set off for the Forbidden Forest after breakfast. Dumbledore had scheduled their meeting for 8:30, but she didn't want to make him wait, so she left the castle early. Even so, Dumbledore was already there when she arrived. She spied the headmaster's back from a distance and hurried over. It would be rude to keep an elder waiting. Ada prided herself on being polite. "I'm sorry, Professor, I'm late," she said to Dumbledore, who stood at the edge of the forest. "No, it's not our agreed time yet. I simply arrived early," he replied. "I wanted some fresh air in the Forbidden Forest, but since you're here, we can start early. That way, we can still make the Quidditch match afterward." As they walked into the trees, Ada asked, "Are you going to watch the match too, because of what Quirrell did last time?" Dumbledore did not usually attend Quidditch matches. As the greatest wizard in the magical world, he had a multitude of affairs to oversee. Ada suspected he wasn't there for the sport. "You could say that, but not quite," he said as they walked. "First, I won't allow any harm to come to my students. Second, it is useful to needle Quirrell, to make him aware that I suspect him." Quirrell's previous attempt to harm Harry had failed, and it was uncertain whether he might try again. That was part of why Snape had insisted on being the referee. Dumbledore's presence at the match was meant to draw Quirrell's attention, to make him feel observed and hurried into either making a mistake or revealing himself. Quirrell, however, had been indecisive, neither confessing to gain leniency nor acting boldly, so the situation had been allowed to fester. If Quirrell kept dragging his feet, the matter would gather dust. Left with no other option, Dumbledore had to prod him into making a decision sooner rather than later. They reached a small clearing. Dumbledore clapped his hands once, and an invisible barrier rose around them. He produced his wand and said, "This barrier will keep the rest of the Forbidden Forest from being damaged by the two of us. Now, take out your wand and show me what you can do." When did being told to fight count as instruction? Ada thought, a brief flash of indignation. She hadn't yet passed Professor McGonagall's and Snape's tests. Was she supposed to be fighting above her level now? Still, she wasn't frightened. She might feel fear at many things, but not this. One can be afraid of an enemy before deciding to fight. Once the choice to meet them is made, losing courage before the battle is already defeat. Ada drew her wand without hesitation. Attack with everything you have. No need to defend, Dumbledore instructed. Ada had never been in such an uncompromising duel. Practice with the trial dummy had always involved back and forth. She had never been told to attack only. She launched into the assault with relish, casting spell after spell with deliberate intent behind each. At her summons, massive stones, like summits plucked from the earth, plummeted from the treetops. But they were feints. The real attack was the steady stream of magic radiating from her wand, ribbons of light cutting through the mist of the Forbidden Forest. Dumbledore parried the spells with the Elder Wand, deflecting the stones so they crashed harmlessly to one side in a cloud of dust. Then a giant of stones strode toward him, each step shaking the clearing. When the statue collided with his protective shield, it shattered to pieces. Dumbledore's left hand twitched instinctively, but he did not use magic with it. Otherwise, the fragments might have rebounded toward Ada. Hidden behind the destroyed stone giant, a stupefy flashed, augmented by a strange effect Ada had learned to use, the graceful relief state attached to the spell. That surprise caused Dumbledore genuine trouble. He had to shift his feet and dodge. This was not something he could simply block in place. No matter how great a wizard one was, the body remained flesh and blood, vulnerable to injury. Even the most potent magic could be stopped short by a well-placed spell. There was a peculiarity in the magical world. High offensive capability often came with low personal defense. Wizards could unleash destructive power, but if an enemy's spell penetrated their guard, their bodies suffered as any mortals would. That fragility made defensive charms and permanent protection so valuable, and why Ada had been so pleased when her protective charm became permanent. It gave her room for error. If an opponent broke through, she had a chance to recover and retaliate. The lesson lasted 2 rounds. In the first, Ada's assault had indeed troubled Dumbledore, but no single strike decided the contest. The second round was more balanced toward Dumbledore. He pressed the attack, and Ada found herself scrambling to survive. In a direct one-on-one, no one alive could beat Dumbledore. The future Ada might, perhaps, but the present Ada was not there yet. Dumbledore's offensive was relentless. Trees sprang up to block her, vines lashed from odd angles, and spells came in combinations that were hard to counter. Ada, who was used to delivering such attacks, found herself without good counters. She kept her wand moving, preventing the trees from closing in, the vines from strangling her, and most importantly, trying to avoid the spells. It was exhausting. When Dumbledore finally ceased his barrage, Ada sat down against a battered trunk, breathing hard. Her U-wand lay in her hand as her mind replayed the fight. Dumbledore sat beside her and asked quietly, "Do you understand?" Ada nodded. She did. "When you attack, you separate main strikes from feints, and that's very good," Dumbledore said. "But you separate them too cleanly. Your feints and your true attacks don't transition smoothly, and that makes it easy for an opponent to see which is which." He went on, "Against opponents like yourself, that method works, and you can fight only with spells. But against someone far superior, you become helpless, like you were today. Do you remember Filius in the dueling competition? Many competitors had greater magical attainments than him, and yet Filius won. Do you know why?" Dumbledore asked. Ada had once asked the Weasley twins a similar question and answered, "Exceptional talent?" When Dumbledore laughed at that reply, he gave his own explanation. Because Filius's attacks were more efficient. He knew his understanding and application of magic were less refined than his opponents, so he compensated by making every action count. Dumbledore's words set Ada thinking. The flaws he pointed out, her inefficient attacks, the rigid transitions between feints and true strikes, were exactly her weaknesses. She used feints to conceal her intent because her attacks lacked efficiency, yet those feints were too separate, leaving gaps in the flow of magic. It only takes a tiny flaw for a duel to be decided. A seemingly insignificant opening can be the difference between standing and lying down. That was the point of this private lesson. Dumbledore had exposed her mistakes so she could correct them and go further. He did not try to remake her in his own image. Every witch and wizard found their own path in magic, and had Dumbledore forced his style on her, it might have confused her growth. Instead, he pointed out where Ada's habits failed and guided her to strengthen those weaknesses. "All right, come on, let's head back. The Quidditch match awaits," Dumbledore said, helping her to her feet. "And we'll see what sort of performance Quirrell puts on." 179. Violence caused by the Black Whistle. Quirrell, still wearing his ridiculous turban, sat in the stands ostracized by those around him. His bizarre outfit made acceptance difficult. He didn't care about the isolation, though. His eyes stayed fixed on Snape out on the pitch. Snape had ruined his plans before. If it weren't for that man, Quirrell told himself, he would already have killed Harry and received his master's reward. Today, Snape had even gone so far as to apply to be the match referee. Did he think that would stop him? Quirrell forced a smile. Years of feigning a stutter had made his expressions look twitchy rather than friendly. He wouldn't be stopped by a single professor. After all, he'd played Snape like a fiddle before. Potter had pointed his suspicions elsewhere and never suspected Quirrell. Who would suspect poor, pathetic Quirrell? Snape, standing on the field, kept scanning the stands for Quirrell. He was there both to stop Quirrell from acting and to deepen Harry Potter's mistrust of him. From what he'd observed this year, Snape thought Harry's abilities were far inferior to Ada's. Harry couldn't do what Ada had done in her first year. It would be better to let Harry drift from the truth. The farther he was from it, the safer he'd be. The thought made Snape's expression darken. The presence of the occupant on the 8th floor had followed events without intervening, seemingly unconcerned about Harry's safety. At that moment, Dumbledore appeared on the field. Snape hadn't expected him and, had he known, would have thought twice about applying to be referee, though he instantly understood the headmaster's intention. From the stands, Quirrell saw Dumbledore as well. Just a moment before he'd been plotting a subtle way to kill Harry, when he saw the principal, his mind went blank. Panic filled his eyes, his hands trembled on his knees. "Have they discovered me?" he asked himself. "Is Dumbledore suspicious too?" A faint voice from inside his turban answered, hard and weak. "Stay calm, you fool. Dumbledore hasn't caught you. What are you afraid of?" The voice was so faint that speaking those words seemed to have used up its strength, yet they steadied Quirrell instantly. His hands still trembled, but far less. He could breathe. Ada arrived as the teams lined up. She'd come from the Forbidden Forest, had had to shower, and so was a little later than Dumbledore. The match had drawn the whole school. Almost every teacher and student was in the stands, and getting a good place was a squeeze. The crowds mixed the houses together, not the usual neat separation. From the start, Snape's whistle favored Hufflepuff. For no clear reason, he awarded them a free kick. If this were a Muggle match, many would call bribery. Ada thought Snape's primary motive was to protect Harry and incidentally to boost Hufflepuff. But since Dumbledore was present, protecting Harry was less necessary. Snape could openly support Hufflepuff. The professor's favoritism was blatant. The Slytherin house head was doing exactly what one would expect. Gryffindor's players were furious. Their looks could have burned Snape off his broom. Hufflepuff, suddenly favored, looked bewildered. Did Snape have some special relationship with Professor Sprout? It was an odd thought for Badgers to indulge, but there it was. On the field, the Weasley twins, provoked beyond restraint, sought revenge. George swung his bat hard and struck a bludger straight at Snape. Had the potions master not ducked, he would have spent a long time in the hospital wing. George hadn't planned to be so reckless, but Snape's refereeing had crossed a line. Ada smacked the railing in dismay. Why give Snape an excuse to punish them, she thought. Of course, Snape blew his whistle, and Hufflepuff got another penalty. The Gryffindors booed loudly. Play resumed. Harry, circling like an eagle, made a beautiful dive. He'd spotted the golden snitch. Cedric only reacted after Harry moved. How could Cedric catch up to a Nimbus 2000? It wasn't all his fault. Snape's baffling calls and the constant interruptions had left the Hufflepuff team disoriented, and Cedric's focus slipped, while Harry's stayed sharp. Seeing Cedric's delayed reaction, Ada relaxed. The match seemed secure. She turned to the commotion behind her. She'd heard shouting that sounded far more interesting than the repeatedly interrupted game. From that angle, she saw something unexpected. Long-limbed Ron flipped over seats, landed in front of Malfoy, and sent him sprawling. Ron and Malfoy rolled together on the ground. Nearby, Neville shed his usual timidness and took on Crabbe and Goyle, wrestling two of Slytherin's brutes to the ground. Though he was getting pummeled, Neville clung on, creating an opening for Ron to have a one-on-one with Malfoy. It was a surprisingly moving scene. What with so many brothers in Ron's family, standing up to a spoiled boy should be within reach. Ada pushed through the cheering crowd toward the scuffle. Goyle was pinning Neville and punching him, while Crabbe had broken free and was trying to support Malfoy. Crabbe stood up, felt a hand on his shoulder, and swung blindly. It connected with nothing. He whirled to see a blonde girl behind him. He froze, his fists stopping midair. Ada smiled at him. She was only there to break up the fight, she promised herself. It wasn't personal revenge. Crabbe didn't seem to appreciate the kindness. He kept brainlessly smacking Ada's right hand with his face. After a few hits, perhaps realizing facial contusions wouldn't pay off, Crabbe collapsed and began feigning injury, an act that would cost 100 galleons to resolve, no doubt. In the confusion, Ada stumbled and bumped into Goyle, who was still on top of Neville. The fierce boy returned the favor, mercilessly slamming his face into Ada's left hand. Hermione had been screaming with excitement at the match and hadn't noticed the scuffle. When she finally looked, she saw Crabbe and Goyle lying on the ground, their faces swollen as if badly hurt, obviously playing up their injuries, and Ron and Neville being bullied by Malfoy, with Ada standing to the side, her hands trembling from the blows. The law of action and reaction holds true. Slapping someone, or being slapped in the face, hurts a great deal. 180. Don't let others sway your thoughts. The Gryffindor-Hufflepuff match was over, and the scuffle in the stands had died down. The students, finally satisfied, hauled Ron and Neville to their feet. Draco Malfoy lay on the ground, still insisting that he would tell his father. Having wealthy, influential parents, now there was something to envy. But that same background was both Draco's blessing and his curse. The Malfoy's wealth had raised Draco in arrogance. His father taught him to lean on power to bully others, to take pleasure in insulting classmates, and to be proud and imperious. In Ida's book, he'd learned nothing of worth. If that was typical of pure-blood families, she supposed she could see why Voldemort had failed. Between the Dark Lord's madness and arrogance and the idiocy of many of his followers, it's a wonder he had accomplished so much. If he'd had a cadre of truly clever people, things might have turned out very differently, precisely why Dumbledore remained so cautious about the possibility of Voldemort's return. Ida shook her hand. Even though she'd used magic to restrain the two big boys and shielded her hand when she'd slapped them, it still smarted. She'd probably need something for the swelling when she got back. As for the two bruised faces on the ground and Malfoy's noisy threats, she didn't much care. She had only touched the boys lightly. There was no way it warranted much fuss. Why should she be held responsible for both the damage and the mourning? The crowd had surged down from the stands to celebrate. Even Dumbledore had joined them beside Harry. No one paid any attention to Ida, standing off to the side, or to the three lying on the ground. They were completely overlooked. When Ron and Neville let go, Malfoy pushed himself up. He glanced at Ida with scorn, then turned toward Harry Potter on the field. To Malfoy, Harry's victory and the adoration he received were intolerable. One man was being lifted on shoulders, the other was nursing bruises. The contrast rankled him. Ignoring Crabbe and Goyle still moaning on the pitch, Malfoy stalked away toward the castle. Ida held no particular grudge against Draco. She saw him as another misguided child shaped by bad examples. If he stayed that way, she thought, she'd make him learn the meaning of the word regret. But she couldn't fathom some things. Why had Malfoy first tried to befriend Harry in a way that felt more like recruitment than friendship? Why, after Harry rebuffed him, did Draco keep picking fights? What was driving him? An hour after the match, Ida and the Weasley twins found their way down to the Hogwarts kitchens. House elves swarmed around, preparing cakes and drinks until the three of them could barely carry another plate. The elves' enthusiasm embarrassed the trio. They felt almost bad for always arriving empty-handed and leaving with arms full. Still, This was a victory celebration, and the elves' hospitality was overwhelming in the best way. They returned to the common room, laden with food. The main heroes hadn't yet come back, but the common room was already at full tilt, song, shouting, and off-key cheering. If Gryffindor won its next match against Slytherin, the Quidditch Cup would be theirs. The last time Gryffindor had taken the cup was back when Charlie was at Hogwarts. Now, years later, the possibility of securing the title by beating their old rivals was all the more intoxicating. The students sang like drunks, even though few had drunk anything at all. Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned midway through the festivities and were immediately surrounded, hoisted onto shoulders, and hailed as heroes. Harry's smile, though, didn't reach his eyes. Ida could see it was forced. He hadn't looked like this at the end of the match. Something had happened while he was away. Ron and Hermione wore the same worried expressions. For three kids who'd been laughing not long before to look so troubled, only something enormous could have done that. Ida thought they must have stumbled onto some astounding discovery. She didn't know then that the trouble those three would cause in the coming days would be equal parts comic and disastrous. In the weeks after the match, Harry and his friends took to trying to stop the harassment of Professor Quirrell. To them, Quirrell, stammering and timid as he was, deserved sympathy. They believed he was bravely standing against darker forces and trying to protect the Philosopher's Stone. They couldn't bear to see him mocked and humiliated. But their efforts had little effect. The students still sneered at Quirrell, and the only help the trio could offer amounted to awkward encouragements and badgering a few classmates. Convinced they needed someone with more sway, they came to Ida and the twins, pleading for help. "Ida, can you help Professor Quirrell with us?" Harry said, earnest. "He's really too pitiful." Fred and George fought hard not to laugh. Ida herself had tried to reason with Harry before, but he would not be dissuaded. He was convinced he was right. After talking with Dumbledore and Snape, Ida had even less reason to make a spectacle of the truth. If the professors wanted Harry kept in the dark for now so he could focus on Snape, it wasn't her place to interfere. It was part test, part training. "Harry, how do you want us to help Quirrell?" Fred asked, his voice quivering with suppressed amusement. Ida said nothing. She sat with her head down, fingers fiddling, giving no sign she was listening. Harry, Ron, and Hermione launched into a dramatic account of Quirrell's victimhood and Snape's villainy. Their pleading was sincere, if a little overwrought. The twins, swept up by the drama, promised to do what they could, advise their classmates, put in a word here and there. When the twins nodded, Harry turned to Ida, hungry for her agreement. She refused him nothing, and yet she refused him everything. She kept her eyes on her hands or on Hermione, refusing to meet Harry's gaze. If George hadn't nudged her, she might have sat there forever. For Ida, staying in the room without storming off was the highest courtesy she'd give Harry that day. Before she left, she addressed Hermione directly. "Hermione," she said quietly, "do you know what a smart witch is like?" Hermione blinked, confused. Ida had been watching her with something like disappointment. The question was out of nowhere. "A smart witch doesn't let the people around her sway her thoughts," Ida said. "She thinks for herself." Then she stood and walked away. Harry had wasted her time. There were more interesting things to do, dolls to fiddle with, puzzles to solve. Since receiving Dumbledore's guidance, she'd even found a way to beat those puppets she'd been playing with. And besides, Gryffindor's final Quidditch opponent had originally been scheduled as Ravenclaw. Ida had quietly arranged for it to be Slytherin instead.